The Arizona heat was a beast of its own, pressing down on the cracked asphalt like a dead weight. John Reynolds eased his truck into the gas station lot, the engine humming steady under the hood. The place was a relic, half-dead neon flickering against dust-coated windows, a rusted ice machine rattling in the shade. Ghost and Titan, his two Belgian Malinois, sat alert in the truck bed, ears twitching, eyes tracking every movement, always watching, always waiting. John had seen enough in his years. Wars, men breaking under pressure, the kind of violence that doesn't just scar skin but eats into your soul. He'd left that life behind, or at least he'd tried. The bell above the station door jingled weakly as he stepped inside. "Just the diesel," he muttered to the old clerk behind the counter, tossing a few crumpled bills on the scratched-up Formica. Didn't take long before trouble found him. The low, guttural rumble of motorcycles drifted in from the highway, growing louder, heavier, until the ground itself seemed to vibrate. A group of bikers rolled into the lot, their leather vests stained with sweat and dust, patches stitched across their backs like war trophies. John didn't turn around. Didn't need to. He knew their type. Seen them before in every corner of the world, men who thrived on control, enforcing fear down the throats of the weak. The leader, a tall, wiry guy with a thick black beard and eyes like cold steel, pulled off his helmet and smirked. Razor. That was the name stitched across his chest. "Well, well, look what we got here." His voice dripped with amusement, the kind of slow, deliberate taunt that was meant to get under your skin. "Old boy still driving that grandpa pickup. You lose your horse, cowboy?" Laughter rippled through the group, low and ugly. John didn't react, just slid his change off the counter and turned toward the door, but Razor wasn't done. "Hey, old man," he called, taking a few steps closer. "You deaf or just rude?" John stopped at the doorway, just for a second, just long enough for Razor to see that flicker in his eyes. Something dangerous. Something patient. Then he walked out. But that was the thing about men like Razor. They couldn't let things go. Outside, one of the bikers, some punk with a shaved head and bad tattoos, stepped up to the truck and let out a low whistle. "Damn, look at these mutts," he sneered. "Ain't these military dogs? Thought only real soldiers got to keep those." Ghost let out a slow, deliberate growl, his muscles coiled like a loaded spring. Shaved head smirked, took another step forward, and flicked a lit cigarette at Ghost's paws. In an instant, the dog lunged, only to be yanked back by John's firm grip on the leash. Titan bristled, his body tensed, his sharp canines flashing beneath a curled lip. John's fingers flexed around the leash, veins popping under his skin. His voice, when it came, was quiet, too quiet. "You don't want to do that." Shaved head smirk faltered, just a flicker, barely noticeable. But Razor caught it. "Shit," Razor chuckled, stepping up beside his guy. "Easy there, Gramps. No need to get all worked up. We're just having some fun." John didn't answer, just stood there, steady, unmoving. Something about that made Razor's grin stretch wider. "Lemme guess," he drawled, tilting his head like he was reading John's soul. "Retired military? Looking for peace in the middle of nowhere?" He nodded toward the truck. "Bet you still keep your rifle nice and clean." "Uh-huh." John's jaw ticked. Razor's eyes gleamed. He stepped closer, invading space like he owned it. "Here's the thing, old-timer," he murmured, voice dropping to something only the two of them could hear. "This little town, it's ours, and that means you're in our way." He slapped a hand against John's truck door, leaving behind a dusty print. "So why don't you pack up, take your flea-bitten mutts, and drive your ass somewhere else before someone gets hurt?" Titan let out a sharp bark, cutting through the air like a warning shot. John exhaled slowly, a deep, controlled breath. Then finally he met Razor's stare. And for the first time since the bikers had rolled in, something in Razor's cocky expression shifted. John wasn't scared, wasn't angry, wasn't anything at all, just calm, too damn calm, like a man who had already decided how this was gonna end. After a long beat, John reached up and grabbed the truck door handle. "Move your hand," he said. Razor held his ground, still smirking. "Or what?" John didn't answer. Didn't have to, because something in his eyes said it all. Razor hesitated. A second too long, a fraction too late. John yanked the door open, fast, hard. The edge of it slammed into Razor's hand with a sickening thunk. Razor cursed, stumbling back, cradling his fingers. And just like that, the game changed. The laughter stopped. The other bikers shifted on their feet, eyes darting between their leader and the man who'd just sent a message without lifting a fist. Razor flexed his fingers, his knuckles raw and red. His nostrils flared as he forced out a dry chuckle. "All right," he muttered, shaking out his hand. "All right, I get it." Then he stepped closer. So close, John could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. "You just made a mistake, old man," he whispered. John let the words hang between them for a second. Then he climbed into his truck, shut the door, and drove away. But he knew this wasn't over. Men like Razor don't take no for an answer. And John had just given him a reason to come back. The night air was thick, clinging to John's skin like a second layer. He sat on his back porch, a cold beer in one hand, the other resting lightly on Titan's head. Ghost lay at his feet, eyes half closed, but ears twitching at every distant sound. They were both listening, waiting. John exhaled slowly, letting the tension unwind in his chest. He should have just let it go, should have turned the other cheek, should have remembered that men like Razor don't let things slide. But he hadn't. And now, trouble was coming. The first sign was the distant rumble. Low at first, a murmur on the wind. Then it grew louder, thickening like an oncoming storm. John took a slow sip of beer, eyes narrowing toward the tree line. Then he saw the headlights. 6 bikes, rolling up his long dirt driveway like they owned the place. Their engines growled as they spread out in a loose formation, parking just shy of his porch steps. Dust settled around them like a curtain, the night swallowing the edges of their leather vests. Razor was the first to dismount. He took his time, swinging a long leg off the bike, stretching his fingers, the same fingers John had crushed against the truck door hours earlier. Behind him, his boys spread out, making a damn show of it. Intimidation. 101. John just sighed. He set his beer down on the wooden railing, pushed himself up from the chair, and stepped down onto the dirt. Titan and Ghost followed in sync, staying close, muscles taut beneath their coats. Razor smirked. "Didn't think we'd forget about you, did you?" John rolled his shoulders, ignoring the way the other bikers tensed at even that small movement. "I was hoping," he said dryly. Razor chuckled. "See, that's funny, 'cause I was hoping we wouldn't have to come all the way out here." John looked past him at the men shifting impatiently on their feet, hands resting too casually on the knives and brass knuckles hanging from their belts. He met Razor's eyes again. "You drove all this way for a talk?" Razor clicked his tongue. "Oh, we'll get to talking." He gestured around. "Nice place, quiet, peaceful." He paused, then grinned. "Shame if something happened to it." Titan let out a low, steady growl. Ghost followed suit, both of them inching forward like they were counting the seconds until John gave the command. But John didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, he scratched his chin and nodded toward Razor's hand. "How's the fingers?" Razor's grin twitched just slightly. "Doing all right. Thanks for asking." John gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then he took one step closer, just enough to make the others react, their boots scuffing the gravel. "But Razor?" He held his ground. John exhaled. "I don't care who you are, and I don't care what you do outside my property, but if you ever step foot here again, we're going to have a problem." The smirk on Razor's lips stretched wide, amusement flickering in his sharp eyes. "Oh, we already got a problem, Otter. Old man." And then, just like that, he moved. It was fast. Razor wasn't just some thug. He knew what he was doing. His fist shot up, aiming right for John's face. John caught it, palm to knuckles, solid, controlled. For a second, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then John twisted. Razor yelped as his own momentum betrayed him, his body jerking sideways as John wrenched his arm into an ugly angle. Before the others could react, Titan lunged, teeth flashing as he clamped down on the leg of the nearest biker. The man screamed, stumbling back, trying to shake him off. Ghost was already airborne, slamming into another biker's chest with enough force to send him sprawling. The porch light flickered, illuminating the chaos in flashes. John, still holding Razor's arm in a vice grip, leaned in close, voice a whisper against his ear. "I warned you." Then he let go. Razor staggered back, clutching his wrist, eyes wild with a mix of fury and shock. For a long moment nobody moved. Titan released his grip, stepping back beside John, his chest rising and falling with deep, satisfied breaths. Ghost did the same, his tail still high, waiting for round two. John adjusted his stance, shaking the tension from his fingers. "Any of you dumb enough to stick around?" he asked, his voice calm, almost lazy. The remaining bikers, those still standing, shifted uncertainly. They'd come here expecting an easy scare. What they'd gotten was something else entirely. Razor, chest heaving, wiped his mouth with the back of his good hand. Then he chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "All right," he muttered, stepping back toward his bike. "All right, I see how it is." He shot one last look at John, something dark and promising in his stare. Then he turned to his men. "Mount up." Engines roared back to life. One by one, the bikers climbed onto their Harleys, some limping, some holding onto their bruised ribs. Razor was the last to leave. As he kicked his bike into gear, he pointed a single finger at John. "This ain't over," he called over the noise. "Not even close." John didn't answer, just stood there, watching as the taillights disappeared into the night. When the last sound of engines finally faded, he exhaled. Titan and Ghost sat back down, their heads tilting as they waited for his next move. John scratched behind Titan's ear, then picked up his beer, taking a slow sip. Yeah, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. John had been in enough fights to know when one was over, and when one was just getting started. The night was thick with silence now, the kind that clung to the air like a warning. Ghost and Titan were still on edge, their ears flicking toward every rustling branch, every distant cricket chirp. John let out a slow breath, his fingers idly tapping against his bottle as he watched the empty road. They'd be back, of course they'd be back. Men like Razor didn't just walk away. John had seen the way Razor looked at him before leaving. That wasn't the look of a man retreating, that was the look of a man calculating, and that was the real problem. See, John wasn't just dealing with some backroad punks looking to boost a few wallets and throw their weight around. Razor wasn't an idiot. He didn't get to where he was by being stupid, and smart men knew how to make statements. John didn't sleep much that night, never had, not since the service. There was something about the quiet that never sat right with him. He stayed up on the porch, Titan and Ghost posted beside him, until the first streaks of dawn stretched across the sky. Then, just as he was thinking about grabbing another coffee, boom! The explosion tore through the stillness like a gunshot to the chest. John was on his feet before his mind had fully caught up, Ghost and Titan already sprinting toward the front gate, barking loud enough to shake the windows. His gut twisted as he ran, following the scent of burning fuel, of scorched rubber. And then he saw it, his truck, or what was left of it. The old Ford was a mess of flames and shattered glass, its entire front end crumpled like an aluminum can. Smoke curled up into the morning sky, black and angry, the smell of gasoline thick in the air. John clenched his jaw, staring at the wreckage. Message received. They hadn't come for him last night because they wanted him to wake up and see this. This wasn't just revenge. This was the opening move. By the time John had the fire under control, the sheriff was already pulling up the dirt road, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. Sheriff Buck Cassidy. He was built like an old oak, broad, slow-moving but solid, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in an old western. He adjusted his belt as he stepped out of the cruiser, squinting at the smoldering remains of the truck. "Jesus, John," he muttered, tugging his hat lower, "you piss off the wrong folks." John didn't answer, just kept staring at what used to be his ride. Buck let out a long sigh, like he already knew the answer. "Razor?" John gave a slow nod. The sheriff sighed again, rubbing his jaw. Damn it, I was hoping he'd just pass through. But I heard chatter he was setting up shop around these parts. Looks like you gave him a reason to stay. John turned to face him, his expression unreadable. You gonna do something about it? Buck hesitated. Just a second. Just long enough for John to notice. Look, I ain't saying Razor's a saint, Buck said, choosing his words carefully. But I don't got much on him. Nothing solid. He's smart. He keeps his hands clean. He gestured to the truck. You see anybody do this? No. You got cameras? John shook his head. Buck sighed again. Then all I got's a pile of burnt metal, and your word against his. John's fists flexed at his sides. So that's it? You're gonna let this slide? Buck held his gaze. I know what you're thinking, and I know what you want to do, but you go at him alone. You're just giving him exactly what he wants. John's jaw clenched. So what, I wait? Let him take another shot? Maybe next time it ain't my truck. Buck's face darkened. You let me handle it. John exhaled sharply through his nose. You can't handle him. Silence. Then finally, Buck shook his head, his voice low. No, but you can't either. With that, he turned and walked back to his cruiser, pausing only once before climbing inside. Stay out of trouble, John. Then he was gone, leaving nothing but tire tracks and dust. John spent the next few hours cleaning up. Not much else to do. He could already hear Ghost and Titan panting in the shade, watching him, waiting for his next move. He didn't have to think too hard about what that move was. Razor had taken something from him. Now it was John's turn. The bar was exactly the kind of place a guy like Razor would hole up in. A dive on the edge of town, neon lights flickering against a row of parked Harleys. It smelled like beer, sweat, and cheap cigars, and the music pouring out through the busted screen door was all low bass and bad intentions. John walked in slow, deliberate, eyes scanning. The room barely noticed him at first. A few heads turned, but nobody paid him much mind. Not until he crossed the floor and stepped right up to the bar. The bartender, a burly guy with a face like a busted knuckle, barely looked at him. What'll it be? John didn't answer, didn't even sit down. He just turned his head, just slightly, just enough to catch Razor in the corner of his eye, sitting at a table in the back, drink in hand, laughing with his boys like he didn't have a care in the world, like he hadn't blown up a man's truck this morning. John exhaled slowly. Then, with the kind of calm that made men nervous, he picked up an empty beer bottle from the bar and smashed it against the counter. The room froze, conversations died, chairs scraped, eyes locked onto the man who'd just shattered glass like it was nothing. John rolled his shoulders, flexed his fingers, then turned and fixed his gaze on Razor. Razor's smirk faltered just for a second. Then he leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms out like he was relaxing. Well, look at that, he mused. Guess somebody didn't take the hint. John's voice was quiet, low. I don't do warnings, Razor chuckled, shaking his head. You know what I like about you, old man? You got balls. More than most. He leaned forward, his grin sharp. Problem is, you don't got sense. The bikers around him shifted. John just took another step closer. You got one shot, Razor, he said, voice even. One shot to pack up and get the hell out of town. The laughter in the bar died. Razor held his gaze for a long moment. Then he exhaled through his nose and stood rolling his neck. You keep misunderstanding something, he said, stepping toward John, boots heavy against the floor. I ain't leaving. John let out a slow breath and nodded once. Then I guess we do this the hard way. Razor's grin widened. Now that, he said, is what I was hoping you'd say. The bar was dead quiet, not in that comfortable low-hum kind of way, but in that sharp-edged, somebody's about to die kind of way. John and Razor stood toe-to-toe, the air between them thick enough to choke on. Around them, Razor's crew had started shifting in their seats, hands twitching toward knives, brass knuckles, broken pool sticks, anything that could be turned into a weapon. John noticed all of it, filed it away, then exhaled slow. You sure about this? He asked, voice even. Razor grinned. Hell, old man, I've been sure. That was all the warning John got. Razor swung first, his right hook fast and mean, but John had seen it coming the second Razor's shoulder twitched. He moved just enough to let the punch sail past his head, then drove his elbow straight into Razor's ribs. A sick thud filled the silence. Razor staggered, cursing. Then the room erupted. One of the bikers lunged at John from the side, big, slow, and stupid. John sidestepped him easy, grabbing the guy's arm mid-swing and twisting hard. A sharp pop echoed as the biker let out a strangled yell, his shoulder dislocating clean. Titan and Ghost weren't far behind. Before another biker could grab John from behind, Ghost barreled into him like a goddamn missile, knocking him clear off his feet. The guy hit the ground hard, scrambling back on his elbows as Ghost bared his teeth, lips curled in a vicious snarl. Titan was already on another, his teeth sinking into a man's thigh, dragging him down with raw power. John barely had time to register the chaos before Razor came back swinging. This time the punch landed. It cracked against John's jaw, snapping his head sideways. Pain exploded behind his eyes, but he didn't go down, didn't even stumble. Razor blinked, confused. John just spat blood onto the floor. Then he smiled. "You hit like a drunk teenager," he muttered. Razor roared. Razor coming at him again, but John was already moving. He ducked under the wild punch, then drove his knee up into Razor's gut. Razor folded with a grunt, and before he could recover, John grabbed him by the collar and slammed him onto the bar counter. Glass shattered, bottles tipped over. The bartender backed up fast, hands in the air. "Hey, take this shit outside." John ignored him. He pressed down hard on Razor's throat, his forearm pinning the man against the sticky wooden surface. Razor gasped, trying to shove him off. John leaned in close. "I could kill you right now," he murmured. Razor stilled. John could feel the fight still humming inside him, the barely contained rage crawling under his skin. It would have been so easy, so damn easy. Snap his neck, be done with it. But easy was a trap. And Razor needed to feel this. John let go suddenly, stepping back. Razor collapsed onto the floor, coughing, clutching his throat. Ghost and Titan stood guard, their breath heavy, their fur bristled with adrenaline. Around them the rest of the gang lay scattered, moaning, groaning, broken in one way or another. John rolled his shoulders, shaking out the tension. Then he crouched next to Razor, speaking low. "I gave you a choice," he said. "Now I'm giving you another." Razor glared up at him, eyes burning. "Get out of town, take your boys and go," John continued, "because next time I ain't stopping." For a long moment Razor didn't answer. Then slowly he laughed, low, hoarse, and filled with something dark. "You don't get it, do you?" he rasped. John narrowed his eyes. Razor wiped blood from his busted lip, grinning up at him. "This ain't just my crew, old man," he said. "You think I'm the worst thing that's coming?" John didn't move, didn't blink, but something cold curled in his gut. Razor coughed, spitting blood onto the floor, then grinned wide. "You just started a war, Reynolds." John walked out of the bar without looking back. Ghost and Titan flanked him, their ears still perked, their bodies still on edge. He could hear Razor still coughing behind him, hear the rest of the bikers groaning as they pulled themselves off the ground. But he didn't care. He knew better than to celebrate. This wasn't a victory. It was just round one. And Razor had just made it clear he wasn't the biggest monster lurking in the dark. John slid into his truck, well, his replacement truck, and fired up the engine. Time to prepare. Because whatever was coming next, he sure as hell wasn't going to be caught off guard. John drove in silence. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, the faint glow of distant streetlights barely breaking through the night. Ghost and Titan sat rigid in the back, ears still twitching, muscles tight. They could feel it too, that uneasy weight in the air, the kind that settled before all hell broke loose. John clenched the wheel a little tighter. Razor wasn't bluffing. Guys like him, they didn't talk just to hear themselves speak. If Razor said something worse was coming, it meant he had the connections to make it happen, and that meant John had a decision to make. Stay and fight, or leave. He exhaled through his nose. Hell, It wasn't even a real choice. The next morning, John was up before the sun. He moved through his usual routine, but everything felt different, sharper, tighter, the way it had felt back in the service, in those long stretches of waiting before a mission went loud. The coffee was bitter. The air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. Titan sat by the window, watching the driveway like a sentry. Ghost stayed close to John's side, his breath steady but his tail low. They knew. John grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopped on a name he hadn't touched in years. Mike Carter, former Navy SEAL, former teammate, and the only man John trusted to watch his back. His thumb hovered over the call button, then tires crunching on gravel. John's head snapped up. Ghost and Titan exploded from their resting spots, barking, their bodies coiled tight like springs ready to snap. John moved to the window, peering out. 2 SUVs, blacked-out windows, parked just outside the front gate. Not bikers, something else. John let out a slow breath. Then, calm as ever, he grabbed the shotgun from under the kitchen counter and headed outside. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The SUVs sat idle, engines still humming, heat rising off the hoods in shimmering waves. John stopped a few yards from the gate, Ghost and Titan flanking him on either side, still growling low. Then, finally, the driver's door on the first SUV opened, and out stepped a man John hadn't seen in years. Victor Alvarez, tall, broad, sharp as a blade. A man who once worked security for drug cartels down south. A man who had no business being this far north unless he was here for something serious. John's grip on the shotgun tightened. Victor grinned, slow and lazy, like they were old friends meeting for a drink. "Been a long time, Reynolds." John didn't smile, didn't move. "Not long enough," Victor chuckled, rubbing his chin. "Still got that attitude, huh? Good. I like that." Behind him, the passenger door opened. Another man stepped out, younger, lean, the kind of guy who looked like he'd slit a throat without thinking twice about it. John didn't like the way he was looking at Ghost and Titan. Victor followed his gaze and waved a hand. "Relax, boys. We ain't here to make a mess." John arched a brow. Victor smiled again. "Not yet, anyway." John exhaled slowly. "Say what you came to say, Victor." Victor let the silence stretch just long enough to be irritating. Then he sighed, placing both hands on his hips. "You really did a number on Razor," he said. "And now you got people asking questions, people who don't like loose ends." John remained still. "What people?" Victor smirked. "The kind that don't like their investments being interrupted." There it was. This wasn't just about Razor anymore. This was bigger. John nodded once, slowly. "Cartel?" Victor shrugged. "Let's just say there are some interested parties, and those parties, they want this situation handled." John let the words sink in. Handled. That could mean a lot of things. Victor smiled again. "Now you're a smart guy, Reynolds. You know how this goes. You got 2 options." John waited. Victor held up a single finger. "1, you pack up, disappear. Move on, forget this little town even existed. Razor gets to keep his operation, and my employers don't have to send people up here to clean up the mess." Then he held up a second finger. "Or 2, you don't." The air seemed to thicken. Ghost let out another low growl. Victor's smirk never faded. "And if I don't?" John asked. Victor sighed dramatically. "Then, my friend, you become the mess." A long, tense silence. Then John smiled. Just a little. Just enough to make Victor hesitate. "Yeah," John said, voice low. "See, here's the thing." He took a step closer, eyes locked on Victor's. "I don't scare easy." Victor's grin twitched. "That so?" John nodded. "That's so." Victor exhaled through his nose, shaking his head like John had just done something disappointing. Then he stepped back toward the SUV, signaling to his men. "All right," he said. "You want to do this the hard way? We'll do it the hard way." He climbed into the driver's seat, rolling down the window. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The SUV pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust. John watched them disappear down the road, his jaw clenched, his mind already working through 1,000 different scenarios. Ghost and Titan sat beside him, still tense, still waiting. John exhaled. Then he pulled out his phone, scrolled to Mike Carter's name, and pressed call. It was time to bring in reinforcements, because this wasn't just a biker problem anymore. This was a goddamn war. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. Reynolds. No hello, no bullshit. John exhaled, stepping back onto his porch, eyes still locked on the dirt road where Victor's SUV had disappeared. Carter, he said, I need a favor. A beat of silence, then a slow chuckle. Shit, man. Ain't heard from you in what, 6 years? 7. That's what I figured. And let me guess, this ain't a social call. John ran a hand through his beard, jaw still tight. Got some people coming my way, he said. Cartel connected. Professional, not the kind that talk things out. Mike Carter didn't hesitate. How many? Don't know yet, John admitted, but they're organized. Got a pipeline set up through some biker crew. Leader goes by Razor. He's small time, but the guys above him, they ain't. Another silence. Then Carter's voice came back low, serious. You got a plan? John smirked. Working on one? Carter chuckled again. That's what worries me. Then, after another pause, you at the house? Yeah, stay put. I'll be there by nightfall. The line went dead. John slipped the phone back into his pocket. Titan and Ghost sat beside him, waiting, watching. John exhaled. Looks like we got company coming. Neither dog moved, but Ghost let out a quiet, approving huff. Yeah, they knew. This wasn't just defense anymore. This was war. John spent the rest of the day getting ready. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. First, he checked the perimeter, reinforced the back fence, made sure the security cameras were running, moved a few things around in the barn just in case he needed a fallback point. Then came the weapons. John wasn't a gun nut, never had been, but a man doesn't spend years in the service without keeping a few things tucked away for a rainy day. And right now, it was pouring. He cracked open the old storage locker in the basement. Inside, nestled beneath a dusty tarp, sat his old M4A1, still clean, still loaded. Next to it, a pair of custom Glocks, a few knives, some extra magazines. He strapped on the shoulder holster, tucked one of the pistols inside, and set the other on the kitchen counter within easy reach. By the time he was finished, the sun was setting, and Mike Carter was pulling up the driveway. The truck rolled to a stop in a slow crunch of gravel. John stepped off the porch, meeting Carter halfway. He hadn't changed much, still broad-shouldered, still carrying that easy, dangerous confidence of a man who'd seen too much and come out the other side sharper for it. He killed the engine and climbed out, shaking his head. Jesus, he muttered, eyeing the property. Still living like a damn hermit. John smirked. And you still talk too much. Carter grinned. That's why you called me, ain't it? John motioned toward the porch. Come inside. We got a lot to talk about. Over beers and low conversation. John laid everything out. The bikers, the cartel ties, Victor's visit. Carter listened, nodding along, occasionally letting out a low whistle. When John finished, Carter sat back, rolling the bottle between his hands. Well, shit, he muttered. You don't do nothing small, do you? John exhaled. Never have. Carter tapped a knuckle against the table. You got eyes on Razor's crew, where they operate? John nodded. Bar on the edge of town, runs out of a chop shop behind it. That's their hub. Carter scratched his chin. And the cartel guys? No idea, but they're watching. Carter's lips pressed into a tight line. Yeah, that's a problem. John leaned forward. I ain't waiting for 'em to bring the fight here. We take this to 'em first. Carter's eyes darkened. You serious? John's jaw flexed. Damn right I am. Carter stared at him for a long moment. Then finally, he let out a slow, dangerous grin. Well, he said, cracking his knuckles. Guess we better make sure we send a message. The plan wasn't complicated, because complicated plans get people killed. John and Carter sat in the dim glow of the porch light, a worn-out map spread between them on the wooden table. The bar, the rusted nail, sat on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where bikers, ex-cons, and desperate men all found common ground. Behind it, a chop shop. That was their real moneymaker. Drugs, stolen bikes, weapons, maybe even some human trafficking mixed in. Razor wasn't running some backroad gang. He was a cog in something bigger. And John was about to break the machine. "So we're clear," Carter muttered, tucking his pistol into his waistband. "We're not here to negotiate." John smirked, racking the slide on his Glock. "We're here to make a statement." Carter grinned. "Now that's the Reynolds I remember." They climbed into Carter's truck, Titan and Ghost, loading up in the back. The engine rumbled to life, and with a slow, steady turn of the wheel, they rolled out into the night. Time to remind some people what real fear looked like. The Rusted Nail, 11:47 p.m. The bar was alive with noise. Engines rumbling, music blasting, voices raised in drunken conversation. John and Carter parked down the street, just out of sight, cutting the lights before stepping out. From their vantage point, they could see the setup. Bikes lined the parking lot, chrome catching the moonlight. A couple of Razor's guys leaned against the wall outside, smoking, talking shit. A third stood by the door, hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Inside, probably a dozen more. John exhaled through his nose. "We go in loud, they scatter. We go in smart, they don't walk out." Carter nodded. "We start at the shop, cut the head off the snake." John glanced at Titan and Ghost, both dogs still as statues waiting, ready. "Let's go." They moved fast. "Quiet." John took the lead, Carter covering his six as they cut across the back lot toward the shop. The place was locked up for the night, but that didn't mean it was empty. John crouched by the side entrance, ear to the metal. Voices, 2, maybe 3. Carter pulled a slim crowbar from his jacket, wedging it between the doorframe. A quick jerk. The lock snapped. John pushed inside first, gun up, clearing the space. The chop shop was cluttered. Half-torn-down bikes, rusted toolboxes, the stink of oil and sweat hanging heavy in the air. And at the center of it all, 3 men sitting around a makeshift table, counting stacks of cash. They barely had time to react. John moved first. Pop, pop. 2 rounds into the first guy's chest before he even reached for his gun. Carter was right behind him, dropping the second with a clean shot to the knee before slamming him face first into a metal workbench. The third tried to run, but Ghost was faster. The dog hit him mid-stride, taking him down hard, jaws clamping around his arm as he screamed. John strode forward, pressing his boot into the guy's back, forcing him down. "Where's Razor?" he asked, voice calm. The man wheezed. "Fuck you." John applied more pressure. The guy howled. "Try again." The man struggled, panting, then spat out. Inside the bar." John nodded, looked at Carter. "Let's finish this." The Rusted Nail, 12:12 a.m. They didn't bother with subtlety. John kicked the front door open, and the second it slammed against the wall, the whole damn bar froze. Razor sat at the far end, mid-laugh, beer in hand. His grin died the second he saw John standing in the doorway, gun raised. The silence stretched. Then, "Kill him!" Chaos erupted. John dropped the first guy who moved. Carter took out another near the pool table, his shot punching through the man's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Titan and Ghost went straight for the throats. Glass shattered, bottles crashed. The stench of blood and gunpowder filled the air. John didn't stop moving, didn't hesitate. He was hunting. Razor bolted for the back exit, shoving past his own men, scrambling like a rat trying to find daylight. John followed. Out the door, down the alley. Razor was fast, but John was faster. He tackled him hard, sending both of them crashing against the dirt. Razor rolled, reaching for the knife at his hip. John caught his wrist, twisted, a snap. Razor screamed. John flipped him onto his back, pressing the barrel of his Glock against his forehead. Razor panted, his breath ragged, sweat dripping down his face. "You—" John cut him off. "You don't talk now." Razor swallowed hard, his bravado draining out of him like air from a punctured lung. John's voice was low, controlled. "You burned my truck. You brought cartel into my town. You came for me in my own home." Razor's breath hitched. John leaned in, pressing the barrel harder against his skin. "So tell me why I shouldn't put you in the ground right now." A long, shuddering silence. Then Razor whispered, "Because if you do, You won't see the next one coming. John frowned. The next what? Razor swallowed again, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. You think it's just me, just Victor? He let out a ragged laugh. You just pissed off the people who own Victor. John didn't move, didn't breathe. Razor grinned, bloody and wild-eyed. You just made enemies you can't kill, Reynolds. John stared down at him. The temptation was there. End it now. Right here, but no, not yet. He needed Razor alive, because if what he was saying was true, John had just stepped into something far bigger than a biker gang. He had just started a war with men who didn't lose. John exhaled, then stood, dragging Razor up with him. Then I guess I better start making friends. John yanked Razor to his feet, shoving him hard against the alley wall. The biker grunted, still clutching his broken wrist, his breath shallow, his eyes darting, always looking for an escape, always calculating. John pressed the barrel of his Glock against Razor's temple and leaned in, his voice low, steady. Who owns Victor? Razor let out a short, bitter laugh, wincing as the movement sent another wave of pain through his body. You think killing me makes this go away? He coughed, spitting blood onto the dirt. You really don't know what you stepped into, do you? John didn't blink. Educate me. Razor swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Then he sighed through his nose, shaking his head. Cartel don't send their own guys this far north. Not usually. Too much heat. They work through crews like mine. Independent operators, guys who know the land, know how to move product without stirring up the feds. His eyes flickered up to John's. But you just went and burned one of their distribution hubs to the ground. John stayed quiet, waiting. Razor's lips twitched, something like amusement flickering beneath the pain. You think Victor's top of the food chain? He's just a middleman. The real guys, the ones who own this pipeline? They ain't men you can fight in a bar. John's grip on the gun didn't waver. Names. Razor exhaled slowly, licking blood from his busted lip. Nah, he muttered. Not gonna do that. John let the silence stretch. Then he pulled back the hammer on his Glock. Think real hard about that. Razor let out another shaky breath, staring past John into the dark alley, as if looking for something, anything to get him out of this. Then, finally, he muttered, Camilo Ortega. John frowned. That name wasn't familiar. Who is he? Razor swallowed again, eyes still flicking around like he was afraid someone else might be listening. Cartel logistics. He's the one who sets up routes, finds guys like Victor to keep the wheels turning. You screw with his business, he don't send bikers after you, he sends professionals. John processed that. The way Razor was talking, it wasn't just some name drop to buy himself time, it was real fear, which meant John had just stepped into something much deeper than he realized. Where do I find him? Razor gave a dry chuckle, shaking his head. You don't find him, he finds you. John pressed the gun harder against his skull. Wrong answer. Razor sucked in a sharp breath, jaw tightening. Last I heard, he's got a guy in Phoenix running things on this end. Runs security for some high-end private club. Name's Diego Suarez. You get to him, maybe he gives you a shot at Ortega. John held his stare for a long moment. Then, without warning, he stepped back and cracked Razor across the jaw with the butt of his Glock. The biker crumpled to the ground, out cold. John exhaled, rolling his shoulders. He could feel Carter's presence behind him before he even turned. Carter stepped closer, nudging Razor's unconscious body with his boot. What's the verdict? John didn't answer immediately. He was still thinking, still piecing things together. Finally, he muttered, We need to go to Phoenix. Carter sighed, shaking his head. Jesus, you just can't do anything small, can you? John holstered his gun. Never have. The drive to Phoenix was quiet. John kept his eyes on the road, his mind already mapping out possibilities, contingencies. Titan and Ghost were curled up in the back seat, resting but not fully asleep. They could feel it too, the shift, the escalation. Carter finally broke the silence. So let me get this straight. You piss off some bikers, end up burning their shop down, and now we're going after a cartel logistics guy. John kept his hands steady on the wheel. Seems that way. Carter let out a dry laugh. You got a death wish, Reynolds. John smirked. Not yet. Carter exhaled, rubbing his temples. All right, so what's the plan? Walk into this club, ask nice, hope they don't put bullets in us before we get a word out? John shook his head. No, we do it quiet. Watch first, learn who's coming in and out. Get eyes on Suarez, then we figure out how to get close. Carter leaned back, tapping his fingers against his knee. You think this Suarez guy's just gonna give up Ortega? John's jaw flexed. Everybody talks, if you know how to ask. Carter smirked. Yeah, that's what worries me. Phoenix was alive with movement by the time they arrived. Neon lights cut through the darkness, the city humming with late-night energy. John pulled the truck into a quiet parking lot near the club Razor had mentioned, La Puerta Negra, the kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't need to. If you knew, you knew. Carter surveyed the building through the windshield. This the spot? John nodded. Yeah, it wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The real power wasn't in the club itself. It was in the people moving in and out. And right now, John was looking for one person in particular. Diego Suarez. Carter adjusted his jacket. So what's the play? John checked his watch. We wait, see who comes and goes, figure out who Suarez is before we make a move. Carter smirked. Surveillance, huh? Just like old times. John didn't smile. He just kept watching. Something told him they wouldn't have to wait long. And he was right, because less than 20 minutes later, a blacked-out luxury SUV pulled up to the curb, and a man stepped out. Slick suit, dark sunglasses, built like a linebacker. And the way the security moved around him. Yeah, that was Diego Suarez. John exhaled slowly, his muscles coiling. It was time to go hunting. John watched from the shadows, leaning against Carter's truck, arms crossed over his chest. The club was alive, pulsing with energy. Men in tailored suits, women in designer dresses, all slipping past the velvet ropes into La Puerta Negra. It was the kind of place that didn't just serve drinks. It served power, money, secrets, and at the center of it, Diego Suarez. The man moved like he owned the ground he walked on. Because in a place like this, he did. John exhaled through his nose, watching as Suarez stepped past the entrance, his security fanning out behind him. A tight-knit formation, well-trained. Not just muscle, but men who knew violence. Carter followed John's gaze. You're thinking we just walk in there, huh? John smirked. You got a better idea? Carter exhaled. Yeah, we don't. John rolled his shoulders, pushing off the truck. Come on, let's get a closer look. They moved through the alley behind the club, keeping to the edges, slipping between parked cars. John's steps were slow, measured. He wasn't just looking for a way inside. He was looking for patterns, security rotations, blind spots, weaknesses. It didn't take long. By the back entrance, two men stood watch, thick-necked enforcers armed but relaxed, smoking cigarettes, laughing under the glow of a dim security light. Sloppy. John nodded toward them. That's our door. Carter arched a brow. Yeah? What's your plan? Walk up and ask nice? John tilted his head. Something like that. Before Carter could argue, John was already moving. He walked with purpose, straight toward the guards, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. The men stiffened as they noticed him approaching, fingers drifting toward their holsters. John stopped just short of them. I need to talk to Suarez. The bigger of the two, a bald guy with a scar running down his cheek, let out a short, humorless chuckle. Yeah, and who the hell are you? John smiled. Then he moved. His hand shot out fast, grabbing the man's wrist just as he reached for his gun. In the same motion, John twisted hard, forcing the arm into an unnatural angle. The guy barely had time to grunt before John drove a knee into his ribs, sending him crumpling sideways. The second guard moved, hand darting toward his piece, but Carter was already there, stepping in smooth, pressing a cold steel blade against the man's throat. Yeah, I wouldn't, Carter muttered. John held the first guard against the wall, his forearm pressing against his windpipe. Tell Suarez Reynolds is here now! The man struggled, teeth bared, but John didn't let up. Then after a long beat, he nodded. John eased off, stepping back, keeping his gaze steady. The man wheezed, rubbing his throat, then fumbled for his radio. Boss! he croaked. "We got a situation." Static. Then a voice crackled through. "Send them up." John's lips curled slightly. That was the thing about men like Suarez. They were smart enough to know when a storm was coming. Inside La Puerta Negra, the air inside was thick with cigar smoke and low music. John and Carter followed the guard through the VIP section, past silk curtains and booths filled with men who had blood on their hands and money in their pockets. Then they reached a private lounge. Suarez was waiting. The man barely looked up from his drink as they entered, his posture relaxed, his fingers tracing the rim of a whiskey glass. His suit was crisp, his hair slicked back, a perfect picture of control. John knew the type. Suarez finally looked up, dark eyes sharp, studying them. "You've been making noise," he said, voice smooth, measured. "That's not smart." John pulled up a chair, lowering himself into it. Carter stood back, arms crossed, scanning the room, noting the exits. John exhaled, folding his hands together. "You and I got a problem," he said. Suarez chuckled, shaking his head. "No, you got a problem, amigo." He leaned forward, setting his glass down. "You burned down Razor's operation. You put Victor in a bad spot. Now Ortega's paying attention. And Ortega," he spread his hands, "he doesn't like attention." John's expression didn't change. "You're going to set up a meeting," he said. Suarez blinked. Then he laughed, shaking his head. "You got balls, old man." John tilted his head. "That a yes?" Suarez's smile faded. "You don't meet Ortega," he said, voice cooling. "Not unless he wants to meet you." John let the silence stretch. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping. "Then you better tell him to want to." Suarez stared at him. Something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, curiosity. Then he exhaled through his nose, reaching for his drink. "All right, Reynolds," he muttered. "I'll make the call." John leaned back. Good. Now they were getting somewhere. The air inside La Puerta Negra was heavy. Too much smoke, too much silence. Suarez sat across from John, fingers tracing the rim of his glass, eyes sharp and unreadable. The man radiated control, the kind that came from years of handling dangerous men and making problems disappear. But John wasn't a problem that could disappear, not easily. Suarez exhaled, reaching for his phone. "You want a meeting with Ortega? Fine. But understand this. Once you step into that world, you don't walk back out." John didn't blink. "I wasn't planning on it." Suarez smirked, shaking his head. "You sure got the attitude for this shit, viejo. But attitude ain't enough. Ortega, he don't just kill men. He erases them. Buries them so deep even God forgets where they were." John leaned forward, voice low, steady. "Then I guess I better make sure he remembers me." Suarez studied him for a long beat, then sighed, flipping open his phone. He tapped out a message, eyes never leaving John's. John didn't bother watching the screen. He already knew what the text said. "We have a problem, and his name is John Reynolds." The drive back was quiet. John sat in the passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past, his mind already working through what came next. Carter drove, his fingers tapping against the wheel, his own thoughts running just as deep. After a while, Carter finally broke the silence. "You ever stop to ask yourself what the hell we're doing?" John smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You mean besides walking straight into the mouth of the beast?" Carter sighed. "Yeah, besides that." John exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "This ain't just about me anymore. These guys, Ortega, Suarez, the cartel, they think they own everything they touch. They think fear is enough to keep men like me quiet." Carter grunted. "And you just have to prove 'em wrong." John turned his head, meeting Carter's gaze. "Wouldn't be the first time." Carter exhaled, shaking his head. "You ever get tired of fighting?" John looked back out the window. The truth was, he didn't know how to stop. By the time they pulled up to the house, it was past midnight. The porch light cast long shadows over the dirt driveway, the scent of the desert thick in the cool night air. John climbed out, stretching his back, but something felt off. Titan and Ghost were already at the door, ears perked, bodies stiff. They smelled it too. Carter stepped out of the truck, frowning. "You good?" John held up a hand, silencing him. Then he saw it. A single red dot, painted against his chest. Sniper. John didn't think. He moved. A sharp whistle. Titan and Ghost bolted for cover. John threw himself sideways as the first shot cracked through the night, shattering the side mirror of the truck. Carter dove behind the engine block, cursing. Son of a... Another shot. This one splintered the porch railing where John had been standing seconds earlier. They weren't just sending a message. They were trying to put him in the ground. John rolled onto his stomach, scanning the horizon. The shooter was smart. No muzzle flash, no obvious perch. But he was out there, watching, waiting. Carter pulled his pistol, breath steady. You see him? John exhaled through his nose. Not yet. Then, out of the corner of his eye, movement, a flicker of shadow. There. John raised his Glock, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet tore through the night. A sharp thud followed. Silence. Then slowly a body slid from the ridge behind the property, collapsing into the dirt. Titan and Ghost were already moving, sprinting toward the downed shooter, snarls ripping through the night. Carter let out a breath. Jesus, what the hell kind of mess did you step into? Man. John stood, dusting himself off. The kind that don't end till somebody's dead. They moved toward the body. The man was still breathing, barely. Blood soaked his tactical vest, pooling in the dirt beneath him. He wasn't some street thug. John could see that right away. This was a professional. Military-grade equipment, suppressed rifle, no gang colors, no obvious affiliations, a contractor, somebody Ortega had on payroll. John crouched beside him, yanking his vest open. The shooter coughed, eyes glassy, but still aware enough to recognize the man kneeling over him. John leaned in close. Tell Ortega I'm coming. The shooter shuddered, his last breath rattling out of him. John stood, wiping the blood off his knuckles. Carter let out a slow breath. Shit. John turned to him, jaw tight. No more waiting, no more playing defense. Carter met his gaze. We taking the fight to him? John nodded. Damn right we are. The morning came too soon. John barely slept. He sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, Titan at his feet, Ghost pacing restlessly. The shot-up truck still sat in the driveway, a reminder of what was coming. Carter came out stretching, rubbing a hand down his face. So what's the plan? Genius. John sipped his coffee. We hit Suarez first. Carter snorted. Bold strategy. Walk into a cartel club and kill the second in command? John shook his head. Not kill. Leverage. Carter arched a brow. John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Suarez is connected, but he's not untouchable. He works for Ortega, but he's still a businessman. He cares about self-preservation. Carter's smirk faded. You think he flips? John exhaled. He will, if we give him a reason to. Carter crossed his arms. And if we can't? John's eyes were cold. Then we burn it down. Carter stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. Shit, man. You really don't know how to do things simple, do you? John stood, tossing back the last of his coffee. Never have. By nightfall, they were back in Phoenix. The city pulsed with neon, the desert heat still lingering even after the sun had set. They parked a block away from La Puerta Negra, keeping to the shadows. Suarez was inside. John could feel it. And by the time the night was over, one way or another, he was walking out with answers. John and Carter moved through the alley behind La Puerta Negra, the thick smell of trash and spilled liquor clinging to the air. The club hummed with energy, the bass from the music shaking the walls. But out here in the dark, it was just silence and waiting. John crouched by the service entrance, eyes flicking to the security camera mounted above the door. They'll have eyes on us soon, Carter muttered, pulling a suppressor from his jacket and screwing it onto his pistol. You sure you don't want to just shoot our way in? John smirked. Tempting, but we need Suarez talking, not dead. Carter sighed, adjusting his stance. Yeah. Always got to do things the hard way, huh? John ignored him and knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps, then silence. It didn't take long. The peephole slid open, and a pair of dark eyes peered through. "¿Qué quieres?" the voice behind the door asked. John kept his voice calm, measured. "Tell Suarez Reynolds is here." Silence. Then the peephole snapped shut. Carter exhaled through his nose. "Well, that's one way to announce ourselves." John just waited. He could feel Carter's eyes on him, probably thinking this was another bad idea. He wasn't wrong. The door creaked open an inch. A thick-necked enforcer filled the frame, his body blocking the entrance, one hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Suarez's men weren't the usual gang muscle. These guys had training. The way this one moved, the way his stance shifted slightly as John spoke, meant he wasn't just some street thug. He was ex-military. "Suarez doesn't want to see you," the guard said flatly. "Walk away." John tilted his head. "You sure about that?" The guard didn't answer. John sighed. Then he moved. Fast. His left hand shot up, grabbing the man's wrist just as he started to draw his weapon. His right elbow came up next, smashing into the guard's throat. The man choked, staggering back, and Carter stepped in, raising his silenced pistol and putting a round straight into the guy's knee. The enforcer screamed, collapsing to the floor, clutching his leg as blood pooled beneath him. John shoved him aside and stepped inside the club. Inside La Puerta Negra. The hallway was dimly lit, the music from the main floor pounding through the walls. They moved fast, guns drawn, checking corners, clearing the space with practiced efficiency. John knew where they needed to go. The VIP lounge. That's where Suarez held court. They slipped into the back corridors, passing the kitchens, the supply rooms. A few workers looked up, eyes wide, but no one moved to stop them. No one wanted to be involved. Smart. Then they reached the VIP entrance. Two guards, armed, talking quietly. John raised his pistol. Carter did the same. Two quick shots, one suppressed, one not. The first guard dropped instantly, a bullet between the eyes. The second went down, clutching his stomach, gurgling, trying to reach for his gun. Carter put another round in him, ending the struggle. John pushed forward, stepping into the lounge. Suarez was already standing, a glass of whiskey in his hand, surrounded by three more of his men. His dark eyes flicked from John to the bodies in the hallway. Then he smirked. "Well," he muttered, taking a sip. "Guess I should have seen this coming." A deal with the devil. John kept his gun trained on Suarez as he stepped forward, Carter flanking him. "You and I need to talk." Suarez sighed, setting his glass down. "Talk? You just shot up my club. You really think I'm in the mood for conversation?" John exhaled. "Ortega sent a sniper to my house." Suarez's expression didn't change. "And?" John's jaw clenched. "And that makes it personal." Suarez chuckled, shaking his head. "Everything's personal with you gringos, that's the problem." He turned, pacing slightly, hands in his pockets. "You think because you put a few bodies in the ground you're making a difference. But Ortega, he doesn't care about bodies. He cares about business." John stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time we put a dent in his business." Suarez finally stopped, turning to look at him fully. "You're serious?" John nodded. Suarez studied him for a long moment. Then he exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You're a dead man, Reynolds." John smirked. "Yeah, people keep telling me that." Suarez was quiet for a long moment. Then finally he said, "You want to hurt Ortega? I can tell you where to start." Carter raised a brow. "And why the hell would you help us?" Suarez smirked. "Because Ortega's getting reckless, and reckless men bring heat. He's bad for business." John nodded. He had a feeling Suarez wasn't being completely honest. He probably had his own play here. Something that benefited him down the line. Didn't matter. Right now, they needed each other. Suarez picked up his whiskey again, swirling the liquid. "Ortega's got a shipment coming in. Big one. Weapons, cash, product, moving through a warehouse outside Tucson. Security will be tight, but nothing you can't handle." John's eyes narrowed. "You set us up, you die first." Suarez chuckled. "Relax, amigo. You getting rid of that shipment does me a favor too." John exhaled. "Where's the warehouse?" Suarez grabbed a napkin from the bar, scribbled an address and slid it across the table. John picked it up, read it, then he pocketed it. Suarez smirked. "I'd say good luck, but you'll need more than that." John turned, Carter following close behind. No more talking. Now it was time for action. The road to Tucson. They drove in silence, the desert stretching endlessly on either side of the highway. Carter finally spoke. "You really think Suarez gave us a clean target?" John didn't take his eyes off the road. "No, but we're going anyway." Carter sighed. "Yeah, that's what I figured." John tightened his grip on the wheel. They weren't just picking a fight anymore. They were cutting straight into the heart of the beast, and the beast was about to bite back. The road stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Arizona desert. John gripped the wheel tight, eyes locked on the horizon. The truck rumbled beneath him, its worn-out tires humming against the pavement. Beside him, Carter checked his rifle for the third time, fingers moving over the weapon with the ease of a man who had done this too many times before. Behind them, Titan and Ghost lay stretched across the back seat, their ears twitching at every bump in the road. They could sense it, the tension, the inevitable collision ahead. "You think Suarez played us?" Carter finally asked, breaking the silence. John didn't look over. "Probably." Carter let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, figured." He exhaled through his nose, eyes scanning the empty desert around them. "And we're still going through with this?" John tightened his grip. "Damn right we are." Carter sighed, shaking his head. "You ever think about just walking away?" John smirked. "No." Carter muttered something under his breath, then leaned back in his seat, adjusting his rifle against his thigh. "Yeah, didn't think so." They drove in silence for another few miles, the Tucson city lights still distant, glowing faintly against the night sky. The warehouse was on the outskirts, exactly where men like Ortega liked to do business. Far enough from civilization to avoid attention, close enough to the highway for easy transport. A perfect place for an ambush. John knew it. Carter knew it, and they were still driving straight toward it. They pulled off the highway about a mile from the target, killing the headlights as they rolled to a stop behind an abandoned gas station. The building was long dead, its windows shattered, its rusted pumps standing like forgotten relics. John killed the engine and stepped out, stretching his back as the dry desert air pressed against his skin. Carter joined him, pulling a pair of binoculars from his pack and scanning the distance. The warehouse was a squat, ugly thing. Concrete walls, steel doors, the kind of place that didn't need to look good because nobody outside the business ever saw it. The lot surrounding it was lined with trucks, big rigs with their trailers locked tight. "Shipment's already here," Carter muttered. John nodded. "Security." Carter swept the area again. "Two on the roof, armed. Couple more near the entrance, probably more inside." John exhaled, running a hand down his face. "We go in quiet. Take out the sentries first. Keep it controlled until we have no choice but to go loud." Carter grinned. "Yeah, 'cause that always works." John ignored him, stepping back toward the truck. He opened the door, Titan and Ghost immediately perking up, waiting. He crouched, running a hand over Titan's head. "Stay close. Keep low," he murmured. "We move fast." Ghost let out a low huff, his tail flicking once. Carter checked his rifle one last time. "Let's get this over with." John nodded. Then they moved. The desert wind kicked up dust as they closed the distance. They stayed low, hugging the shadows, moving with practiced ease. John reached the first guard at the side of the building. The man was leaning against the wall, checking his phone, his rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. John didn't hesitate. One quick movement, an arm around the throat, a sharp twist, then silence. The guard slumped, his body going limp. Carter took the second sentry before the man even knew he was there, slipping behind him and driving a knife between his ribs. The body hit the ground without a sound. John motioned to the ladder leading to the roof. Carter nodded and started climbing, his boots barely making a sound against the metal rungs. John turned his attention to the door. Titan and Ghost flanked him, their muscles coiled, waiting for the signal. John pressed a hand against the steel handle. Locked, of course. He took a step back, aimed his silenced pistol at the lock, and fired. The suppressed pop barely carried over the wind. He pushed the door open slow, stepping into the dimly lit corridor. And then everything went to hell. The first shot came from the catwalk above. John moved, throwing himself to the side as bullets tore into the wall behind him. Ghost lunged ahead, his powerful body slamming into the nearest guard before the man could even react. Titan went the other way, his teeth clamping onto the arm of another cartel soldier, just as the man raised his rifle. Carter's gunfire cracked from the roof, short, controlled bursts taking out targets before they could get their bearings. John didn't stop. He pushed forward, dropping another man with 2 quick shots to the chest. The warehouse erupted in chaos, men shouting, boots pounding against concrete, radios crackling with frantic orders. Then John saw it. The shipment. Stacked crates, pallets of sealed boxes marked with Ortega's insignia, drugs, weapons, money. Enough to fund an army. Enough to hurt Ortega where it mattered. John didn't hesitate. He grabbed a stray Molotov cocktail from one of the fallen guards, probably meant for them, and flicked open his lighter. A heartbeat later, flames erupted. The fire spread fast, licking up the wooden crates, turning stacks of cash into smoldering ash. John barely had time to react before the warehouse doors burst open and a fresh wave of soldiers poured in. More guns, more bodies, more trouble. John ducked behind a forklift as bullets tore through the air, sparks flying as rounds chewed into steel. He returned fire, dropping 2 more men before they could reach cover. Carter was still above, laying down fire, but even he was starting to sound annoyed. "Jesus, John, you had to light the whole damn place up!" John smirked, reloading. "Figured we'd make an impression." Titan and Ghost were still in the fight, darting between crates, tearing into the men too slow or too stupid to react. Then, a new voice, loud, sharp, and too damn familiar. "Reynolds!" John's stomach tightened. He turned, his eyes locking onto the man standing near the burning crates, a rifle in one hand, a radio in the other. Victor Alvarez, Suarez's middleman, Ortega's personal cleaner. Victor smirked. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" John wiped sweat from his brow. "Took you long enough to show up." Victor chuckled, stepping forward. The flames cast long shadows behind him, his dark eyes gleaming with something like amusement. "You think this matters?" he said, gesturing to the burning shipment. "You think this hurts Ortega?" John didn't answer. Victor sighed, shaking his head. "All you did was buy yourself a quicker death, amigo." Then he raised his rifle, and everything went to hell. John didn't think. He moved. The moment Victor raised his rifle, John dove behind a stack of crates, bullets splintering wood and tearing through the air where he'd just stood. The warehouse was an inferno now, flames licking up the sides of the walls, heat pressing against his skin like a living thing. Titan and Ghost darted between cover, snarls cutting through the chaos as they hunted men too slow or too stupid to run. Carter was still on the catwalk above, laying down fire in sharp, controlled bursts, but it was getting crowded up there. More of Ortega's soldiers were pouring in, and they weren't here to take prisoners. John exhaled, forcing himself to focus. The fire had spread to the main shipment, the wooden crates feeding the blaze like an oil spill. If they stayed here much longer, the whole damn building would come down around them. Victor's voice cut through the noise, laced with amusement. "You should have stayed in your little shack, Reynolds. You could have lived out your days in peace." John peeked around the edge of the crate, lining up a shot. Victor was still standing near the burning stacks, rifle at the ready, flanked by 3 more of Ortega's men. He wasn't running. He wasn't afraid. That was a problem. John fired first, his bullet slamming into one of the men at Victor's side. The guy crumpled instantly, dead before he hit the ground. The other 2 turned, spraying automatic fire in his direction. John ducked back as splinters rained down around him. Carter's voice crackled through the earpiece. "You got a plan here, or are we just winging it?" John smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Since when have I ever had a plan?" Carter grunted. "That's what I was afraid of." John turned his attention back to Victor. He had to end this now, before reinforcements showed up. The fire was already forcing some of Ortega's men to retreat, but Victor wasn't moving. He was waiting, which meant he had a backup plan. John exhaled. Then he moved. He broke cover fast. weaving through the smoke, keeping low. Titan and Ghost flanked him, their bodies low to the ground, eyes locked on Victor's men. Another burst of gunfire cracked past John's head, but he didn't stop. He fired twice, hitting the second guard in the leg. The man screamed, dropping to the floor, his gun clattering away. That left just Victor and one more. John slid behind a metal support beam, pressing his back against the hot steel. Victor's boots crunched against the warehouse floor. He was getting closer. John tightened his grip on his pistol. Then, just as Victor stepped into view, John kicked a loose metal pipe across the floor. The noise was enough to make Victor react. He turned fast, raising his rifle, and John shot him. The bullet punched into Victor's shoulder, sending him staggering back with a curse. His rifle clattered to the ground. Blood darkened his sleeve, but the bastard was still on his feet. Victor looked at John, breathing hard, then grinned through the pain. "You don't get it," he muttered, shaking his head. "You think this matters? You think burning one shipment stops anything?" He gestured to the fire raging behind him. "Ortega doesn't lose. Not like this." John stepped forward, gun raised. "Guess we'll find out." Victor's grin widened. "You don't even see the bigger picture, do you?" John exhaled sharply. "Then why don't you tell me?" Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "Not my job." Then he moved. With his good arm, he yanked something from his vest, a detonator. John's stomach dropped. Victor pressed the trigger. The explosion was instant. The blast ripped through the warehouse, knocking John clean off his feet, sending him crashing hard onto the concrete. The heat was unbearable, the fire now raging out of control. Somewhere in the haze, he could hear Titan and Ghost barking, but his ears were ringing too loud to focus. Carter's voice crackled in his earpiece. "John! What the hell just happened?" John coughed, tasting blood. "Victor happened." He forced himself up, blinking through the smoke. The warehouse was collapsing, steel beams groaning, the ceiling cracking under the strain. He could see shadows moving through the fire, Ortega's men running, trying to escape before they were buried alive. Victor was gone. John scanned the wreckage, but there was no sign of him. The bastard must have slipped out during the blast. John cursed under his breath. Carter dropped down from the catwalk, grabbing John by the arm. "We need to go." John didn't argue. He whistled once, sharp, commanding. Titan and Ghost sprinted toward him, their fur singed but otherwise unharmed. Together they ran. They barely made it out before the building collapsed. The force of the final explosion sent a fireball roaring into the night sky, the shockwave rattling the truck as John and Carter sped away. John sat in the passenger seat, breathing hard. Wiping soot from his face, Carter kept his eyes on the road. "You good?" John exhaled. "Yeah." "You sure? 'Cause you just got blown the hell up." John smirked, rolling his shoulder. "I've had worse." Carter shook his head. "You're a damn lunatic, you know that." John didn't respond. He was already thinking about the next move. They'd burned the shipment, that was a start, but Victor had walked away, and Ortega, he sure as hell wasn't going to ignore this. Carter glanced over. "So what now? We disappear?" John shook his head. "No, we find Ortega before he finds us." Carter sighed, rubbing his temple. "I was afraid you'd say that." John leaned back, staring out the window at the burning wreckage in the distance. There was no going back now. Ortega was coming, and John would be ready. The fire still burned behind them, a glowing scar against the Arizona night. John watched the orange light fade in the rear-view mirror, his jaw tight, his mind already moving past it. One shipment was gone. That would hurt Ortega, but not enough to stop him. No, all they'd done was piss off the kind of man who didn't take insults lightly. Carter drove, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the steering wheel. "Tell me you got a next move, because I don't like waiting for a guy like Ortega to make his." John exhaled. He'd been thinking about that since the warehouse started crumbling around them. Victor had been too damn confident back there, like he already knew how this ended. That meant Ortega wasn't just sitting back in some cartel stronghold, waiting to hear how things played out. He was moving. "We don't wait," John said finally. "We go straight at him." Carter let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, I figured you'd say that. You got a location." John did. "Suarez. The slimy bastard had given them the warehouse, and it had been a setup, but he hadn't expected John to walk out of that firestorm alive. That meant he thought the problem was handled, which meant he was off his guard. John pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. Suarez didn't hide. He was too arrogant for that. And men like him? They had patterns. He found it quick, an event flyer marked for a high-end casino on the edge of Phoenix. Carter glanced over. "You're not serious." John smirked. "Dead serious." Carter sighed, shaking his head. "So we just walk in and have a little chat?" John looked back at him. "No, we walk in and Suarez talks." The Mariposa Grand was the kind of place that catered to people who liked to pretend they weren't criminals. High ceilings, imported marble floors, drinks that cost more than a week's salary. It was built to be a fortress, discreet security at every entrance, cameras tucked into every corner. John and Carter entered separately. No need to advertise they were working together. John kept his movements smooth, his shoulders relaxed, blending into the crowd. Carter took a different route, slipping toward the high-limit lounge, where Suarez was known to conduct business between hands of poker. John spotted him first. Diego Suarez sat at a private table, surrounded by men who laughed too loudly and women who were only there because someone else was footing the bill. He was comfortable, safe, good. John walked up slow, sliding into an empty seat across from him. Suarez barely looked up, dealing himself a fresh hand. "You really don't know when to quit, Reynolds." John smiled. "Neither do you." The laughter at the table died. Suarez exhaled, rubbing his temple. He motioned for the others to leave. They didn't argue. Once they were alone, Suarez picked up his whiskey, swirling the ice. "You should be dead." John nodded. "Yeah, but I'm not, and that's a problem for you." Suarez studied him for a long beat, then let out a slow chuckle. "You think killing Victor was enough to scare Ortega?" John leaned in, voice low. "I know Victor's still breathing, which means Ortega thinks I'm just another body waiting to drop." Suarez's smirk faded slightly. John pressed forward. "Tell me where he is." Suarez sighed, setting his drink down. "You don't get it. Ortega isn't some street-level boss you can just walk up to. He's got an army, money, politicians in his pocket. You take out one arm, he grows another." John's jaw tightened. "Then I cut off the head." Suarez shook his head. "You're not hearing me. Ortega isn't here. He's not sitting in some office waiting for you to come knocking." He leaned back. "You want to find him? You go where the money moves." John considered that. Cartels ran on cash flow. Ortega had pipelines, drug routes, gun shipments. The warehouse had been a drop in the bucket. If they wanted to draw him out, they had to hit something bigger. John's fingers drummed against the table. "Where's the next move?" Suarez hesitated, then muttered, "Nogales." John frowned. "Border crossing." Suarez nodded. "They run a freight line through there. Legitimate on the books, but underneath?" He tapped the table. "That's where the real money moves. Ortega's men run the logistics." John exhaled. He'd dealt with cartel border routes before. They weren't just operations. They were fortresses. Trying to cut off a supply chain at a crossing like that meant going against more than just Ortega's people. It meant dealing with corrupt border agents, militarized security, more firepower than either of them had. Carter's voice cut through the earpiece. "John, we got company." John's head snapped up. Suarez saw the shift, then glanced over his shoulder. His face paled slightly. Two men were coming through the crowd. Not security, not gamblers. Ortega's men. John stood fast, grabbing Suarez by the wrist. "We're leaving." Suarez resisted for half a second, then realized the alternative and followed. Carter was already moving toward them. The casino lights flickered across his face, his expression tight. "They know we're here," John nodded. "Then let's go." They moved quick, cutting toward a side exit. The moment they stepped out into the alley, the heat hit them hard. John glanced back. 2, maybe 3 men had followed. Carter exhaled. "You want to do this quiet?" John shook his head. "Not anymore." The first guy barely saw it coming. John was on him before he could draw, slamming a fist into his throat. The man choked, staggering back, but John didn't stop. He twisted, grabbed the guy's arm and snapped it. The scream barely lasted a second before John put him down. Carter handled the second. A quick burst of suppressed gunfire, and the man was a dead weight on the pavement. The third guy hesitated. Wrong move. Titan shot out from the shadows, slamming into him like a freight train. The man screamed, going down hard, Ghost snapping his jaws just inches from his face. John grabbed Suarez and shoved him toward the truck. "Get in!" Suarez didn't argue. They sped off, tires kicking up dust. Carter glanced in the rear view. "We just kidnapped a cartel lieutenant." John smirked. "Yeah." Carter shook his head. "Ortega's gonna love that." John exhaled. "Good. Maybe now he'll come out of hiding." Suarez groaned in the back seat, clutching his arm. "You two are dead men." John didn't even look back. Not yet. The road stretched ahead. The border was waiting, and John was about to cross a line there was no coming back from. The desert stretched ahead, an endless expanse of darkness, broken only by the headlights cutting through the night. The truck hummed beneath them, rolling fast across the highway toward the Mexican border. The road was empty, quiet, but John knew that wouldn't last. In the back seat, Suarez groaned, shifting uncomfortably as Titan and Ghost sat alert beside him. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. He knew exactly what kind of trouble he was in. Carter kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the steering wheel. "How long till they realize we took their guy?" John exhaled, checking the side mirror. "They already know." Carter muttered a curse, tightening his grip on the wheel. "Then we better move." John turned in his seat, leveling his gaze on Suarez. "You keep talking, you keep breathing, you try to play games. I leave you in the desert." Suarez licked his lips, forcing a smirk despite the fear in his eyes. "You think this ends with me? Ortega's got men in every city between here and Mexico. You don't make it out of this alive, viejo." John didn't flinch. "Neither do you." The smirk faded. John leaned in slightly. "Now start talking." Suarez exhaled through his nose, shifting his jaw like he was weighing his options. "The Nogales route runs through a warehouse a few miles past the border. Legitimate on the outside, but inside? It's a war zone. If you think the warehouse you burned was bad, this place makes it look like a convenience store." John processed that. "Who runs security?" Suarez swallowed. "A guy named Hector Mendez, former military, trained in counterinsurgency. He runs Ortega's border ops. Every shipment, every deal, everything goes through him before it moves deeper into Mexico." Carter let out a slow whistle. "We're not just walking into some biker clubhouse. This guy's the real deal." John nodded. "Good." Carter gave him a side glance. "Good. You're enjoying this, aren't you?" John smirked. "No, but I know his type, which means I know how to beat him." Suarez chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't beat Mendez, you survive him." John didn't respond. He just stared out the windshield. Eyes locked on the distant glow of the border checkpoint ahead. The line was coming fast, and they were about to cross it. The Nogales crossing was alive with movement, even at this hour. Trucks idled in long lines, waiting to be cleared. Border Patrol agents moved between vehicles, scanning plates, questioning drivers. A long stretch of steel fencing ran along the edge of the highway, topped with razor wire, security cameras blinking red in the darkness. Carter pulled off onto a dirt road just before the checkpoint, killing the headlights as they rolled to a stop behind a ridge. He turned in his seat. "So how exactly do we plan on getting into Mexico without ending up in the back of a federal cruiser?" John reached into the glove box, pulling out a set of documents. He handed Carter a folder. "Meet our new identities." Carter flipped it open, raising a brow. "Fake IDs, damn good ones too," Suarez snorted. "Ortega's men own this border. You think a fake passport's gonna fool them?" John tilted his head. "Who said anything about fooling them?" Suarez frowned. Then his expression changed as realization dawned. "You want them to see you?" John nodded. "We go through the checkpoint like we belong there. If they think we're sneaking in, we're dead before we hit the highway." Carter exhaled. "Well, shit. Can't say you don't have balls." John smirked. That's what keeps me alive. They drove forward, rolling into the slow-moving line toward the checkpoint. Titan and Ghost stayed low in the back, their bodies tense, waiting. John kept his posture relaxed as a uniformed officer approached, shining a flashlight into the cabin. "Where you headed?" the man asked. John handed over his ID, his voice casual. "Business in Hermosillo. Importing equipment for a construction firm." The officer flipped through the papers, his face unreadable. Then he motioned toward another uniform near the gate. The second man nodded, and then John saw it. The tattoo on the second officer's wrist. Cartel. They weren't just border agents. They were Ortega's men. John kept his face neutral, his pulse steady, but he knew. The second they crossed, word would be sent ahead. They were expected, and that meant they were walking into an ambush. The highway south of Nogales was a long stretch of nothing, desert on either side, dark skies pressing down. John kept his hands loose on his lap, his mind already working through the angles. Carter was tense. "They made us." John nodded. "Yeah." Suarez chuckled from the back seat. "You're dead men, you know that, right?" John didn't look at him. Not yet. The road stretched ahead, empty, too empty. John glanced at the mirrors. "Carter." "I see it." Headlights, at least 4 sets moving fast behind them. Carter's jaw clenched. "Guess they didn't feel like waiting for us to get comfortable." John rolled his shoulders. "Let's find out what they want." Carter let them get closer. Then, as the first SUV pulled up beside them, its tinted windows rolling down, John moved. His pistol was already up before the first shot cracked through the air. The driver of the SUV barely had time to react before John put a round through the side window. The vehicle swerved, tires screaming against the pavement, then rolled hard into the ditch. The second SUV opened fire. Bullets punched into the side of the truck, shattering the back window. Ghost snarled, dropping low to avoid the flying glass. Titan's ears flattened, his body coiled, ready to launch. Carter gritted his teeth, jerking the wheel. "Hold on!" The truck lurched off the main road, kicking up a cloud of dust as they tore across the desert. The remaining SUVs followed, their headlights bouncing wildly across the uneven terrain. John leaned out the window, firing 3 controlled shots. One round clipped a tire, sending another vehicle fishtailing into a rock formation. That left 2. Carter punched the gas. The truck bucked over a dry riverbed, the shocks groaning under the strain. One of the pursuing SUVs hit the same dip and went airborne, slamming nose first into the dirt. One left. John reloaded, exhaling slow. Then the last SUV accelerated. It wasn't chasing them anymore. It was trying to ram them off the road. John barely had time to curse before the impact hit. The truck shuddered, skidding sideways, dirt spraying in every direction. Carter fought for control, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. The SUV slammed into them again. John braced, lined up his shot, and then Titan moved. The dog launched through the shattered back window, landing hard on the hood of the pursuing vehicle. The driver's scream was lost beneath the roar of the engine as Titan's claws raked across the glass. John saw his moment. He fired twice. The first round punched through the windshield. The second hit the driver square in the chest. The SUV veered hard, then flipped, a deafening crash, metal grinding against rock, and then silence. Titan leapt clear, landing hard in the sand, rolling once before sprinting back toward the truck. Carter let out a shaky breath. "Tell me that was the last one." John scanned the horizon. No more headlights. No more movement. For now. He turned to Suarez. "You still think we're dead men?" Suarez swallowed hard, his bravado cracking. John smirked. "Then let's go pay Mendez a visit." The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The truck rolled to a stop in the shadow of a jagged rock formation, the last echoes of gunfire fading into the desert night. The engine hummed quietly, heat still radiating from the hood after the high-speed chase. Dust hung thick in the air, settling in slow waves over the wreckage behind them. John exhaled, glancing back at the road. No headlights, no more movement. For now, they were alone. but he knew better than to think they were safe. Carter let out a low breath, rubbing a hand down his face. "Well, that was fun," John smirked, checking his magazine before tucking his pistol back into its holster. "Could have gone worse." Carter let out a dry chuckle. "You got a real loose definition of worse, Reynolds." In the back seat, Suarez shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between them. His confidence had taken a serious hit. The man who had once lounged in a casino with a whiskey in hand now sat stiff-backed, his breath coming fast, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're insane," he muttered. "You both are." John turned to face him, resting an arm on the back of the seat. "Where's Mendez?" Suarez swallowed hard, licking his lips. "I told you, he runs the border ops. You really think you can just walk into his place and—" John cut him off with a sharp glare. "Where is he?" Suarez hesitated, then finally he exhaled, defeated. "The compound's about 20 miles south, outside of Magdalena." Carter raised a brow. "Magdalena? That's not just some roadside stash house." Suarez shook his head. "No, it's fortified. Guards, towers, cameras, the whole damn place is a fortress." He swallowed again. "You go in there, you don't come out." John considered that. "We've done worse." Suarez let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not this worse. Mendez isn't just a cartel lieutenant. He's ex-military, spent years training with the federales before he went private. He doesn't just protect Ortega's supply lines, he eliminates threats." John absorbed that. It lined up with what he'd already figured. Mendez wasn't some street thug running a glorified smuggling operation. He was a tactician, and that meant he had weaknesses. John turned back to Carter. "We need eyes on the compound. We move at first light." Carter sighed but nodded. "Yeah, guess I better start loading mags." John smirked. "Never hurts." Suarez let out another breath, shaking his head. "You really think you can just take the compound?" John's eyes stayed locked on the horizon. "We don't need to take it. We just need Mendez." Suarez let out a quiet curse, rubbing his temples. "You're gonna get us all killed." John smiled faintly. "Probably." The road to Magdalena. The drive was slow, methodical. They kept to side roads, avoiding main highways. Even with the damage they'd inflicted, Ortega's network was still vast. Word would be spreading. Men would be looking for them. Carter kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight, scanning every turn, every stretch of open desert. "So let's say we actually get to this compound in one piece. What's the plan?" John exhaled. "We get in. We grab Mendez. We make him talk." Carter glanced at him. "You really think he's gonna just roll over?" John's fingers drummed against the dashboard. "Everyone breaks." Carter smirked. "Yeah, I remember that lesson." Suarez shifted in the back seat, still tense. "You don't get it," he muttered. "Even if you get past the security, Mendez doesn't talk. He'd rather die than betray Ortega." John didn't respond, because Suarez was wrong. Everyone talked. They just needed the right incentive. The compound. The Magdalena compound sat at the base of a dried-out riverbed, tucked between rolling desert hills and thick brush. The main house was a sprawling two-story hacienda, walled off with reinforced steel gates. Beyond that, guard towers, trucks, men stationed at every corner, armed and alert. It wasn't just a base, it was a war zone. John and Carter watched from a ridge a half-mile out, scanning the setup through binoculars. Carter let out a low whistle. "Yeah, I hate this already," John grunted. "We're not going through the front." Carter lowered his binoculars. "Well, no shit." John pointed to a gap in the fencing near the south side of the property. The brush was thicker there, partially concealing the terrain. "That's our entry." Carter frowned. "What about patrols?" John counted. 4-minute rotations, 2-man teams. Carter nodded slowly. "That's tight." John smirked. "We've handled worse." Carter sighed. "Yeah, and we're still breathing." "Barely." John turned to Suarez. "You said Mendez handles logistics. Where does he work from?" Suarez hesitated, then finally muttered, "West side, office on the 2nd floor. Usually has 2 or 3 guys with him at all times." John nodded. "That's our target." Carter rolled his shoulders. "Guess we better move." The break-in. They moved under cover of darkness, sticking to the shadows as they crossed the dry riverbed. The wind carried the distant sounds of guards talking, the occasional crackle of a radio. John signaled to Carter, "Wait." One of the patrol teams passed, their boots crunching against the dirt. The second they disappeared behind the main building, John moved. Titan and Ghost stayed low, their bodies pressed against the ground, waiting for the signal. John reached the fence, pulling a pair of wire cutters from his pack. In seconds, they had a hole large enough to slip through. They were inside. They stuck to the walls, moving fast. The compound was alive with movement, vehicles being loaded, guards stationed at every key entry point. But John wasn't interested in them. He was interested in Mendez. The office was above them now. A balcony stretched along the second floor, lined with ornate railing. John motioned to Carter. "Up!" Carter crouched, lacing his fingers together. John stepped onto the makeshift foothold, then launched himself upward, grabbing the edge of the balcony and hauling himself over. He crouched low, scanning the windows. There. Inside, Mendez sat at a desk, reviewing documents under the dim glow of a desk lamp. Two guards stood by the door, their hands resting lazily on their rifles. John exhaled. This was it. He reached for the knife at his belt. Then he moved. The first guard never saw it coming. John was through the window in an instant, the blade slicing across the man's throat before he could react. Blood sprayed the wall as he crumpled silently to the ground. The second turned too slow. John grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the desk before driving the knife deep into his chest. The man choked, then went limp. Mendez barely had time to register what had happened. John leveled his gun at him. "We need to talk." Mendez's face was unreadable, but John could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was already looking for a way out. John smirked. "There isn't one." Mendez exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Then he grinned. "You really have no idea what you've just done." John's grip tightened. Mendez smiled wider. "Ortega's already coming." John's stomach went cold. Then gunfire. An explosion rocked the compound. Carter's voice cracked through the earpiece. "John, we got incoming!" John clenched his jaw. No more time for questions. Now it was about survival. The explosion rocked the compound, rattling the windows and sending dust cascading from the ceiling. John barely had time to register it before the second blast hit, a deep, concussive thud that sent shockwaves through the walls. Gunfire erupted outside, sharp and chaotic, the unmistakable sound of fully automatic weapons tearing through the night. John kept his gun steady, aimed squarely at Mendez's chest. The man didn't flinch. If anything, he almost looked amused. "I told you," Mendez said, voice smooth despite the chaos. "You're already dead." John ignored him, pressing the barrel harder against his sternum. "Who's outside?" Mendez's smirk widened. "Ortega's men." Another explosion, this one closer. John exhaled through his nose. If Ortega had known they were coming, that meant this wasn't just a firefight. This was a trap. Carter's voice crackled in his earpiece, tight with urgency. "John, we got a problem. I count at least 10 SUVs rolling in, plus whatever's already inside. We're boxed in." John glanced toward the door. If they didn't move now, they weren't leaving at all. "Where's the nearest exit?" he demanded. Mendez let out a quiet chuckle. "There isn't one." John grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet, slamming him against the desk. "Try again." Mendez's smile didn't falter, but there was something else in his eyes now, a flicker of hesitation, of calculation. He was deciding whether or not John was worth underestimating. Then Titan let out a low, warning growl. Mendez finally exhaled. "There's a tunnel," he admitted. "Leads to an old well on the north side of the compound." John's eyes narrowed. "Where?" Mendez nodded toward a bookshelf against the far wall. "Behind that." Carter's voice came through the radio again. "John, whatever you're doing, do it fast." John pulled Mendez forward, shoving him toward the bookshelf. "Open it." Mendez hesitated, then reached for a latch hidden beneath one of the shelves. With a click, the entire unit swung outward, revealing a dark passage sloping downward. John barely had time to process it before the door behind them burst open. Two of Ortega's men stormed in, rifles raised. John moved first. He fired twice, his bullets punching through the first man's chest. The second barely had time to react before Titan lunged, knocking him to the floor with a brutal snap of his jaws. Mendez stared. John turned to him. "Move." Mendez hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then wisely, he stepped into the tunnel. John followed, whistling for Titan and Ghost, as Carter's voice crackled through the radio again. "John, they're breaching the second floor." John took one last look at the room, the bodies, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Then he slammed the bookshelf shut behind them. The tunnel swallowed them whole, the escape. The passage was narrow, cut from stone and old wood beams, the air damp and stale. John kept his pistol raised, leading the way, his boots crunching against the dirt floor. Behind him, Carter followed, Titan and Ghost moving silently in the dark. Mendez walked ahead of them, shoulders tense. "How long does this go?" Carter muttered. Mendez didn't look back. "About 50 meters," John exhaled through his nose. That wasn't much. If Ortega's men realized where they were heading, they wouldn't have time to get out before the tunnel became a death trap. The ground trembled slightly, a fresh explosion from above. The cartel was making sure no one left this compound alive. They moved faster. The tunnel sloped upward, leading toward a wooden hatch at the end. Mendez pressed a hand against it, testing the weight, then looked back. "It opens outside the walls. But if they already have the perimeter locked, we'll handle it," John cut in. "Just open the damn thing." Mendez exhaled, then pushed. The hatch groaned, lifting slightly. A thin shaft of moonlight cut through the darkness. John crouched low, peering through the crack. No movement, no gunmen waiting. But it was too quiet. John gestured for Titan to move forward. The dog crept up. Nose twitching, ears flicking. He paused, sniffed the air. Then his muscles tensed. That was all John needed. He grabbed Mendez by the back of the shirt and yanked him down just as a burst of gunfire tore through the hatch. Carter cursed. "Shit!" The tunnel filled with dust and splinters, bullets punching through the wood above them. "They were waiting," Mendez muttered. John grit his teeth. "No kidding." He pulled a grenade from his vest, gripping the pin between his teeth. Carter's eyes widened. "You're really gonna—" John pulled the pin and threw. The grenade arced through the hatch, just as another burst of fire rained down. Then the explosion hit. The night flashed white-hot, a deafening boom shaking the tunnel walls. John moved fast, shoving the hatch open and hauling himself up through the dust and smoke. He landed in a crouch, pistol raised. 2 men were down, their bodies crumpled near the ruined hatch. A third stumbled back, ears ringing. Gun half raised, John shot him twice. Carter was up next, dragging Mendez through the opening. Ghost bounded after him, snapping at a 4th man who had barely managed to stay standing. The compound's outer perimeter loomed just ahead, thick steel fencing, razor wire lining the top. The ground was littered with bodies, burning wreckage from their grenade blasts, throwing long, flickering shadows against the desert. John exhaled. Almost there. Then a fresh set of headlights flared to life beyond the fence. Trucks, 6 of them. More men, more guns. And one of them stepped forward, silhouetted against the beams. Victor, alive, smirking. John's stomach turned to ice. Carter saw him too. "Oh, you gotta be kidding me," Victor's voice carried across the night. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" John tightened his grip on his gun. "Yeah, I get that a lot," Victor chuckled. "You really thought you could take Mendez and walk away?" John glanced at the compound behind them, still burning, then back at the line of men between them and freedom. His mind ran through the options. They could fight, they could run. Neither looked good. Then Mendez spoke. "You're making a mistake, Victor." Victor turned his head slightly. "Oh?" Mendez straightened. "Ortega isn't coming for Reynolds. He's coming for you." The smirk vanished, and just like that the balance shifted. John saw the moment the doubt crept in. Victor wasn't just Ortega's soldier. He was a liability now, and Mendez had just exposed it. Victor's grip on his gun tightened. "You're lying." Mendez shrugged. "Am I?" The hesitation was all John needed. He moved first. His gun came up. He fired. The first man went down before Victor even had time to shout. Then the desert erupted in gunfire. The fight wasn't over, but John wasn't running, not anymore. Gunfire ripped through the compound, rattling the windows as the first explosion rocked the ground beneath John's feet. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of burning fuel. Shouts echoed from below. Ortega's men were already inside, moving fast, sweeping the corridors, hunting. John didn't hesitate. He grabbed Mendez by the collar and yanked him to his feet, slamming him against the desk hard enough to make the lamp flicker. "Tell me what's coming." Mendez grinned, blood on his teeth. "Death." John exhaled sharply through his nose. "Yeah, for you, maybe." Mendez's jaw flexed, but the arrogance didn't leave his eyes. "You think you're untouchable?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "You burned one warehouse and thought that would be enough? Ortega's been doing this for years, viejo. He's got more men, more money, and more bullets than you can count." John tightened his grip. "And yet here we are." Another explosion rattled the building. Mendez flinched this time, the first crack in his armor. John leaned in. "Tell me where Ortega is." Mendez's smirk faltered. Then Carter's voice crackled in his earpiece. "John, we gotta move, now." John didn't argue. He turned and drove the butt of his gun into Mendez's stomach, knocking the wind out of him before hauling him toward the door. "You're coming with us." Mendez struggled, but John had years of leverage and muscle on his side. The man had no choice but to stumble forward as John pushed him into the hallway, keeping his pistol pressed against the base of his spine. The compound was a war zone now. Ortega's men flooded the lower levels, moving in well-trained formations, firing controlled bursts. Titan and Ghost were already in motion, darting between cover, taking down guards before they could react. Carter was waiting near the stairwell, rifle raised, eyes sharp. He fired twice, dropping two more men before they could take position. "We're boxed in." John glanced around, weighing options. The front was a death trap, and the longer they stayed here, the less chance they had of making it out alive. Then he saw it, a side corridor, half hidden behind a collapsed support beam. "Back way out?" Carter asked. John nodded. "We make for it. Stay low." They moved fast, ducking past falling debris, stepping over bodies. Titan stayed close to John's side, Ghost flanking Carter. Mendez tripped, coughing. "You can't win this," he muttered. John shoved him forward. "Watch me." They reached the side exit just as another explosion shook the walls. The steel door at the end of the hallway stood partially open, swinging on its hinges. John didn't stop to question it. He pushed Mendez through first, then followed, Carter covering their six. They emerged into the open desert. The night sky stretched wide above them, but there was no time to appreciate the view. Two black SUVs were already pulling up, headlights cutting through the dust. More of Ortega's men. John clenched his jaw. "No more running." He turned to Carter. "We hold here." Carter exhaled. "Figured you'd say that." John shoved Mendez down behind a broken concrete barrier. "You don't move." Mendez just laughed. "You're both dead." John ignored him, raising his gun as the first SUV's doors swung open. Four men stepped out. Rifles up, John fired first. The first shot caught a man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. Carter took out the second before he could react. The remaining two dove for cover, returning fire. Bullets kicked up dust around them, cracking against stone. Titan and Ghost lunged. Titan reached the closest guard in seconds, his powerful frame slamming into the man's chest, taking him down hard. Ghost wasn't far behind, his jaws clamping down on the last man's wrist, tearing flesh and bone. Then silence. Carter reloaded, glancing around. "That all of them?" John scanned the horizon. The second SUV was still running. The driver was inside, unmoving. Then the window rolled down. John's stomach clenched. A man sat in the driver's seat, relaxed, watching. "Victor," he smiled, slow and lazy. "Didn't expect you to make it out in one piece, Reynolds." John kept his gun raised. "You should have sent more men," Victor chuckled. "Oh, I did." Then he nodded toward the hills. John followed his gaze, and his stomach dropped. Silhouettes, at least 20. moving down the ridge, spreading out, rifles up. An ambush. Victor smirked. I'll give you credit. You've been a pain in the ass, but this is where it ends. John exhaled slowly. No way out, no time. Then Mendez laughed behind him. John turned. Mendez was sitting back, smiling wide. Told you. You don't get out of this. John tightened his grip on his gun. No, he wasn't dying here. Not tonight. He turned to Carter. Get ready. Carter gritted his teeth. We got what? 4 guns between us. John smirked. And 2 dogs. Carter exhaled. Shit. The men on the ridge moved closer, their boots crunching against the dirt. Victor leaned against the SUV, shaking his head. Any last words, Reynolds? John glanced at Mendez. Then he grabbed the man by the collar and threw him forward. The motion was so fast, so unexpected, that even Victor flinched. Mendez stumbled, then boom! A sniper's rifle cracked from the ridge. Mendez's head snapped back, a red mist exploding from his skull. He dropped like a sack of bricks. The cartel's own sniper had just killed their logistics man. Victor's face twisted in rage. You son of a... John fired. His bullet slammed into Victor's leg, dropping him before he could reach for his gun. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. John dove behind cover, returning fire, Titan and Ghost moving like shadows, taking down anyone who got too close. Carter grabbed Victor, hauling him up. We taking him with us? John nodded. He's more valuable alive. They moved fast, dragging Victor toward one of the abandoned SUVs. Bullets shattered the windshield, but the engine was still running. John threw the door open, shoving Victor into the back. Carter climbed into the driver's seat. Tell me you got a plan! John slammed the door shut. Drive! Carter floored it. The SUV lurched forward, kicking up dust as they tore away from the compound. Bullets chased them, sparks flying as rounds bounced off the metal. Victor groaned in the back, clutching his leg. You really don't know when to quit. Or do you? John turned, his gun pressed against Victor's chest. No, but I know who does. Victor frowned. John leaned in. You're going to take me to Ortega. Victor's breath caught. And for the first time, John saw it. Fear. The SUV roared into the desert, dust swallowing them whole. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. The SUV tore through the desert, headlights cutting across the uneven terrain as the dust storm behind them grew thicker. Carter gripped the wheel with both hands, keeping the truck steady despite the shifting dirt and scattered brush. The sounds of gunfire had faded behind them, but John knew better than to think they were safe. Victor Alvarez groaned in the back seat, clutching his wounded leg, his face twisted in pain. Blood soaked his jeans, pooling against the leather seat. Titan and Ghost sat beside him, their bodies tense, their golden eyes locked onto him like he was prey. John turned in his seat, his pistol still leveled at Victor's chest. You're going to tell me everything I want to know. Victor chuckled through clenched teeth, shaking his head. You don't get it, do you? You think you've won something here? He exhaled, his breath ragged. Ortega isn't going to negotiate. He's not going to offer you a deal. You just took his best enforcer, burned his supply line, and humiliated him in front of his own men. John didn't flinch. Good. Victor coughed, spitting blood onto the floorboard. Good. You just put a target so big on your back. Even the federales will step aside when Ortega comes for you. He exhaled sharply. You're dead. You just don't know it yet. John leaned forward slightly, pressing the barrel of his gun against Victor's shoulder wound. Victor hissed in pain, his body jerking back against the seat. John's voice was low, controlled. Where's Ortega? Victor clenched his jaw, his nostrils flaring. Even if I wanted to tell you, I couldn't. He moves. He doesn't sit in one place waiting to be hunted. He's got estates all over Mexico, compounds in every major city. You think you can find him? He shook his head. You don't find Ortega. Ortega finds you. John studied him for a long moment, then exhaled, sitting back in his seat. Guess we'll have to make him come to us. Carter, still focused on the road, snorted. Yeah? And how exactly do we do that? John didn't answer right away. His mind was already working, running through every scenario, every possible leverage point. Victor had said something earlier. Ortega doesn't lose, not like this. That meant pride, that meant ego. That meant Ortega needed to make an example out of them. John holstered his pistol and turned back toward Carter. "We make some noise." Carter shot him a side glance. "We've been making noise all night, John." John smirked. "Not enough." Carter exhaled. "I don't like that look." John glanced at Victor. "Where's his biggest operation right now?" Victor hesitated, then let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're not going to stop, are you?" John didn't blink. Victor exhaled, leaning his head back against the seat. "There's a casino in Hermosillo, El Palacio. It's not just a front, it's where the real money moves. Ortega runs everything through that place. Laundering, deals, meetings. You hit that, you get his attention." Carter frowned. "Casino security isn't like some back-alley warehouse. We're talking cameras, guards, high rollers with connections. That place is crawling with men who'd kill us just for messing up their poker night." John nodded. "That's the point." Carter sighed. "Yeah, of course it is." John turned to Victor. "How do we get inside?" Victor smirked. "You don't. Not unless you have an invitation." John pulled out his knife. Victor's smirk faded. John leaned in, his voice quiet. "Then you're gonna invite us." Victor swallowed. Titan let out a low, rumbling growl. And just like that, the plan was set. El Palacio, Hermosillo, Mexico. The casino glittered under the city lights, its glass facade reflecting the neon signs that lined the streets. From the outside, El Palacio looked like any other high-end gambling den. Sleek architecture, overpriced cars parked along the curb, men in tailored suits flanked by women who could bankrupt a man with a single glance. But John wasn't fooled. He could see the real operation underneath the glitz. The security was thick, discreet, but trained. Men stationed at the entrance, some pretending to be patrons, others standing just close enough to the high rollers to let everyone know they weren't there for drinks. The cameras were placed strategically, covering every angle, every blind spot accounted for. Ortega's empire wasn't built on drugs alone. It was built on power, and power moved through money. John adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket. He hated dressing up, but if they were going to walk in the front door, they had to blend. Carter, in a suit that didn't quite fit, tugged at his collar. "I feel like I'm at my own goddamn funeral." John smirked. "You might be," Carter exhaled. "Comforting." Victor walked ahead of them, his steps slow, hesitant. His leg was still stiff from the bullet wound, but John had made sure he was walking. No crutches, no sign of weakness. Ortega's men would smell it from a mile away. As they approached the entrance, a security guard stepped forward, scanning them. His eyes landed on Victor. "Señor Alvarez," the guard said, nodding. Victor forced a smile. "Negocios," he said, voice tight. "I have guests." The guard hesitated for half a second, then he stepped aside. They were in. The moment they stepped inside, John could feel the weight of the room shift. The music was loud, the scent of expensive cigars thick in the air. But the eyes were on them. Men in suits, pretending to enjoy their drinks. Dealers who weren't just dealing cards. Waitresses who knew more than they let on. Carter muttered under his breath. "We just walked into a nest full of vipers." John nodded. "Yeah." Then, out of the corner of his eye, movement. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the main floor, his eyes locked onto them. He was older, his hair slicked back, his presence commanding. John recognized him instantly. Ortega. Victor stiffened beside him. Ortega smiled, slow and deliberate, like a lion watching a wounded animal limp into its den. Then he gestured for them to follow. John exhaled. They had his attention. Now they just had to survive it. The casino floor buzzed with life. Cards shuffled, dice clattered, glasses clinked, but John barely heard any of it. His focus was on the man standing across the room, watching him with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ortega. He moved like a man who had never needed to rush. Every step deliberate, controlled, effortless. A tailored suit draped perfectly over his broad shoulders, and his hands rested lightly at his sides. Relaxed? But John knew better. Ortega wasn't the kind of man who needed to carry a gun. He had men for that. John's grip on his own pistol tightened under his jacket, but he didn't move. Not yet. Victor Alvarez, still limping slightly from the bullet wound, exhaled through his nose. "You have no idea what you just walked into," he muttered. John smirked. "I hear that a lot." Carter, standing just behind John, tugged at his too-tight suit jacket, eyes scanning the floor. "I count 10 guns on us already," he murmured. John nodded. "Yeah, and that's just what we can see." Then Ortega was in front of them, standing just a few feet away, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the faint burn of cigar smoke. His dark eyes flicked between John and Carter before settling on Victor. "Alvarez," Ortega drawled, his voice smooth, casual. "You look like shit." Victor forced a chuckle. "You should see the other guys." Ortega's smile widened slightly, but his eyes never wavered. "I am seeing them." He tilted his head toward John. "So, you're the ghost that's been haunting my operations?" John met his gaze without blinking. "I guess that makes you the exorcist." Ortega chuckled, shaking his head. "You're bold. I like that." He stepped closer, his expression still easy, still calm. "But bold men tend to have short lifespans in my world," John smirked. "I'm still here." Ortega studied him for a long moment. Then, without breaking eye contact, he snapped his fingers. 2 guards stepped forward instantly, their hands resting on their sidearms, waiting. Ortega's voice remained light. "Do me a favor, amigos. Take our guests upstairs." John exhaled slowly. He knew where this was going, and he was ready. The upper floor, El Palacio Casino. The private suite was dimly lit, with a long glass window that overlooked the casino floor below. A sleek bar stood against the far wall, lined with top-shelf liquor. A single leather chair sat at the center of the room, positioned like a throne. Ortega motioned for John to sit. John didn't. Carter stayed close, his shoulders stiff, his eyes locked onto the guards flanking the door. Ortega sighed, shaking his head. "Why do Americans always have to make things difficult?" He walked to the bar, pouring himself a drink. "You come into my house, kill my men, burn my shipments, and then expect a conversation." John crossed his arms. "Worked so far." Ortega smirked. "Did it?" He took a slow sip of whiskey, then set the glass down with a quiet clink. "You think you've been winning, that you've been hurting me." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You burned 1 warehouse. I have 20 more. You killed some of my men. I have hundreds." He stepped forward, his voice lowering. "But you have nothing." John's jaw tightened. "I have you right where I want you." Ortega chuckled, genuinely amused. "Do you?" Then he snapped his fingers again. The doors opened. 2 more guards entered, dragging someone between them. John's stomach went ice cold. They threw the body onto the floor. Suarez. His face was swollen, one eye nearly shut, his lips split wide. Blood smeared his collar, soaking into his expensive shirt. Ortega crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This man tried to run after you left." He smiled. "I don't like runners." Suarez groaned, coughing weakly. His breath hitched as Ortega gripped his hair, forcing his head up. "Tell them what you told me, hermano." Suarez's good eye flicked toward John, his expression a mix of pain and regret. They know about Nogales," he rasped. "They know about the compound." John's mind raced. The cartel already knew they were coming. Ortega sighed, standing. "You thought you were being clever, that you could force me to come out of hiding." He gestured around. "Well, here I am." John kept his breathing steady. "So what happens now?" Ortega smiled. "Now we talk." John tilted his head. "About what?" Ortega motioned for a guard to hand him something. A thick envelope. He tossed it onto the table between them. "That's $50,000. I'll make it 100 if you walk away right now." John stared at it, then back at Ortega. "That's cute." Ortega exhaled. "You're not my enemy, Reynolds, not really. You're just a man who got in over his head. You walk away, I forget about this. He smiled. Or you stay, and we settle this another way. John was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and pushed the envelope off the table. I don't want your money. Ortega's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. Carter sighed under his breath. Yep, that's what I figured. Ortega nodded slowly. Very well. Then he turned to his guards. Kill them. The moment the words left his mouth, John moved. Hell breaks loose. John's elbow snapped back, slamming into the guard behind him. The man grunted, stumbling just as John spun, driving his fist into his throat. Carter was already moving, grabbing the nearest guard's pistol and putting a bullet between his eyes before he could react. Suarez rolled onto his side, groaning, too weak to move. Ortega barely flinched. He stepped back, pulling a sleek silver pistol from his jacket as the room exploded into chaos. John grabbed the first guard's fallen weapon, ducking behind the leather chair as bullets tore into the walls. Carter fired twice, dropping another man before diving for cover. Titan and Ghost exploded into the room. Titan hit a guard full force, knocking him to the ground, his teeth tearing into flesh. Ghost darted between two men, snarling, forcing them to stumble back, right into John's line of fire. 2 shots, 2 bodies dropped. Ortega exhaled, adjusting his cuffs. Then he raised his gun at Suarez. John saw it too late. The shot cracked through the air. Suarez's body jerked, a fresh bloom of red spreading across his chest. Ortega turned to John, smirking. I don't like loose ends. John's pulse roared in his ears. Ortega moved toward the exit, his guards covering his retreat. John lunged. His shoulder slammed into Ortega, sending them both crashing into the bar. Bottles shattered around them, whiskey soaking into John's sleeves. Ortega grunted, trying to raise his pistol. John grabbed his wrist and twisted hard. The gun clattered to the floor. Then John drove a punch into his ribs. Then another. Ortega gasped, his body jerking. John grabbed his collar, slamming him against the bar. You don't walk away from this. Ortega, bleeding, coughing, still managed to smile. Neither do you. Then the security alarm blared. More men were coming. Carter grabbed John's arm. We gotta go. Now. John stared at Ortega for half a second longer. Then he let go. They sprinted for the exit. They had made their point. But this wasn't over. Not even close. The air outside El Palacio was thick with the weight of what had just happened. John and Carter sprinted through the alley behind the casino, Titan and Ghost flanking them like shadows. The gunfire inside had triggered the security alarms, and within minutes, Ortega's reinforcements would be sweeping the area. Carter yanked open the passenger door of a blacked-out sedan parked at the edge of the lot. He slid behind the wheel, not waiting for permission. We need to move now! John threw himself into the passenger seat, the dogs leaping into the back just as the first guards burst onto the street. Shouts rang out, then the first bullet cracked through the windshield. Go, John growled. Carter floored the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as the sedan lurched forward, dodging parked cars and weaving through narrow back streets. Headlights flared behind them, pursuit vehicles. Black SUVs, just like the ones at the warehouse, packed with Ortega's men. Shit, Carter muttered, checking the rearview mirror. They brought the whole damn army. John leaned out the window, his pistol kicking back hard as he fired at the nearest SUV. The windshield cracked, and the driver swerved, clipping a light pole before spinning out, but 2 more took its place. John clenched his jaw. Get us out of the city. Carter nodded, gripping the wheel tight as he veered onto a ramp leading out of Hermosillo. The neon lights faded behind them, replaced by the vast open darkness of the desert highway. John reloaded. They won't stop. Carter exhaled sharply. Yeah, I got that part. Titan and Ghost growled low in the back seat, their hackles raised. They could feel it too. This wasn't just another chase. This was the endgame. John wiped sweat from his brow, his mind already racing through options. They couldn't outrun them forever. They needed an ambush point, somewhere to turn the tables. Then he saw it, an old abandoned airstrip, barely visible under the moonlight, just off the main road. He tapped Carter's shoulder. "Take the next right." Carter frowned, but obeyed, yanking the wheel hard. The sedan skidded onto a dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust as they barreled toward the airstrip. Behind them, the SUVs followed. John braced himself. It was time to end this. The final stand. The sedan slid to a stop near a rusted-out hangar, its doors long since stripped away by scavengers. John jumped out first, scanning the terrain. The runway stretched into the distance, cracked and overgrown with weeds. There was no cover, but there was space. He turned to Carter. "We use the car as bait. Get ready to move on foot." Carter exhaled, checking his rifle. "This your idea of a plan?" John smirked. "It's a working plan." Titan and Ghost leapt from the car, their bodies low, ears perked. They were ready. The SUVs roared closer, their headlights flooding the airstrip. John took position behind a rusted fuel drum, leveling his pistol. Carter crouched behind the sedan, rifle raised. Then the SUVs skidded to a stop. Doors flew open. At least 10 men stepped out, rifles up, fanning out in formation. And then Ortega. He climbed out of the lead vehicle, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket as if he were merely attending a business meeting. His dark eyes scanned the airstrip, landing on John with something almost like amusement. "Here we are again," Ortega called out. John didn't lower his gun. "Looks that way." Ortega exhaled, shaking his head. "You had your chance to walk away. I even paid you to disappear." John's voice was steady. "Some fights are worth finishing." Ortega smirked. "You really think you can win this?" He gestured to his men. "You're outgunned, outnumbered. This doesn't end in your favor, Reynolds." John just stared at him. "Then let's get to it." Ortega's smirk faded. Then he nodded. The gunfight erupted instantly. John fired first, dropping the closest guard with a precise shot to the chest. Carter's rifle cracked beside him, sending another cartel soldier sprawling. But they were too many. Bullets tore into the sedan, shattering windows, sending sparks flying as rounds ricocheted off the metal. Titan and Ghost lunged, becoming shadows in the chaos. Titan slammed into a gunman's back, his teeth sinking deep. The man screamed, trying to shake him off. Ghost was already moving to the next, his speed blinding. John ducked low, shifting positions, firing 2 more rounds. He caught another guard in the leg, then finished him before he could recover. Carter gritted his teeth. "We're getting pinned down." John reloaded, his mind racing. They were running out of cover. If they stayed here, they were dead. Then another SUV roared onto the airstrip. For a split second, John thought it was more of Ortega's reinforcements, until he saw who was driving. The blacked-out vehicle skidded to a stop, its doors flying open, and familiar figures stepped out. Armed, trained, veterans, John's old military unit. Mike Carter had made a call. John exhaled. Now they had a chance. Turning, the tide gunfire ripped through Ortega's men as John's reinforcements opened fire. The battle shifted instantly. Cartel soldiers scrambled for cover, their careful formation breaking apart under the unexpected assault. John used the distraction to move. He charged Ortega. Ortega barely had time to react before John was on him, grabbing his collar and driving him hard against the SUV. Ortega grunted, trying to raise his pistol. John knocked it away, a punch to the ribs, another to the jaw. Ortega stumbled, wiping blood from his lip, but he still smiled. "You think this matters?" he rasped. "You think you can kill your way out of this?" John grabbed him again, pulling him close. His voice was ice cold. "I'm not killing my way out." Then he spun and threw Ortega straight into the dirt. The cartel boss landed hard, coughing, rolling onto his back. His remaining men hesitated, their confidence shattered. John raised his gun. "Call them off," he ordered. Ortega wiped more blood from his mouth. Then slowly, he let out a chuckle. "You really think killing me changes anything?" John's voice didn't waver. "It ends you." Ortega held his gaze. Then finally, he nodded. His men dropped their weapons. John exhaled slowly. It was over. The cartel had lost its head. The war was won, for now.